The Simpsons has been on the air since the 17th of December, 1989. 36 seasons, 788 episodes, the longest-running American animated series, the longest-running American sitcom, and the longest-running scripted primetime show in the entire history of television. And in all that time, across every single one of those episodes, nobody in Springfield has aged a single day. Bart is still 10, Lisa is still 8, Maggie is still working on that pacifier. Homer still drives to the same nuclear power plant every morning to work for the same ancient billionaire who has never once learned his name. And not a single person in Springfield, not the characters, not the townspeople, not a soul ever pauses and says, "Something is deeply wrong here, but we're going to say it." Because once you start pulling on the threads of this show, once you look past the jokes and the couch gags and the 36 years of accumulated callbacks, you don't find lazy writing underneath. You find patterns. You find buried storylines the show introduced and quietly walked away from. You find fan theories so meticulously constructed, so well supported by canonical evidence, that the writers themselves have been forced to respond to them on the record. And you find a version of Springfield that is darker, stranger, and more disturbing than anything the show has ever said out loud. So settle in, get comfortable. For the next 4 hours, we are going deeper into Springfield than anyone has gone before. And what we find down there might change the way you watch this show forever. Section 1. The Radiation Theory Springfield as a Contamination Zone. Let's start with the theory that explains everything wrong with Springfield in a single sentence. The Springfield nuclear power plant is mutating the entire town. Not as a metaphor, not as a background joke about industrial negligence. Literally, biologically, measurably mutating the people, the animals, and possibly the geography of the town that surrounds it. The evidence for this theory is so extensive, so thoroughly embedded in the canonical fabric of the show, that the real mystery isn't whether the plant is poisoning Springfield. The real mystery is how the show has been showing you this for 36 years, and nobody has taken it seriously. Let's go back to the beginning and lay the foundation properly, because this theory deserves that kind of care. The Springfield nuclear power plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility. It is owned and operated by Charles Montgomery Burns, the wealthiest man in Springfield and, depending on which episode you're watching, possibly the oldest man in America. The plant is the primary source of electrical power for the entire town, and by any reasonable standard of measurement, it is one of the most dangerous industrial facilities in the history of fiction. A surprise safety inspection, the kind of inspection that catches a facility unprepared without time to hide its violations, found 342 of them. 342 separate safety violations in a single facility. The estimated cost to bring the plant up to code was $56 million. Burns refused to spend it, and the reason he refused isn't that he lacked the money. Burns is a billionaire many times over. The reason he refused is that fixing the violations would mean acknowledging they existed. And acknowledging they existed would mean someone might start asking questions about what those violations had already done to the people living downwind of those cracked cooling towers. When you actually look at the violations themselves, when you don't let the show's comedic framing soften the edges, they are remarkable in their severity. Radioactive waste was being dumped directly into bodies of water, not disposed of according to regulation. Dumped into water, the same water Springfield's residents drink, the same water Springfield's fish swim in, the same water that soaks into the ground beneath Springfield's playgrounds and parks and backyard gardens. Radioactive waste was also being dumped onto children's playgrounds directly. Plutonium was being used as a paperweight on someone's desk. Cooling towers that were cracked, the kind of structural failure that in a real nuclear facility would trigger an immediate shutdown, had been patched with chewing gum. Chewing gum. The facility had luminous rats glowing in the dark, running through the walls of an active nuclear power plant that thousands of people live near. And then there is the detail the show drops most casually, the one it delivers and immediately moves past without comment. Human skeletons in the basement. Not a prop skeleton, not a Halloween decoration. The inspection found human skeletal remains inside the basement of a working nuclear reactor facility, and the show never explains who those people were, how they died, or why their bones were left there. The safety inspector files his report. The episode moves on, and nobody in Springfield asks a single question about the dead people under the power plant. The man responsible for preventing all of this, the person whose literal professional function is to ensure the plant does not poison the town, is Homer Simpson. Homer Simpson, whose creator Matt Groening has stated on the record, has an IQ of 55. Homer Simpson, who in the season 12 episode discovered that a crayon had been lodged in his brain since childhood, physically reducing his cognitive function for his entire adult life. Homer Simpson, who sleeps at his workstation. Who has eaten donuts during active meltdown warnings? Who once threw a donut into the reactor core to see if the radiation would make it grow larger? That is the man standing between Springfield and nuclear catastrophe, and he has been standing there failing at that job for over 3 decades. Now, here is where the theory finds its teeth. The very first visible mutant in Springfield appears in Season 2. Blinky, the three-eyed fish. Blinky is pulled from a river near the power plant, and the discovery immediately becomes a news event within the show's universe. A gubernatorial candidate uses Blinky as campaign evidence that Burns is poisoning the environment. Burns is forced to eat the fish on live television to demonstrate its harmlessness. The candidate loses the election. The town watches, shrugs, and moves on. Nobody conducts a follow-up study on the river. Nobody tests the water. Nobody asks the obvious question that any person with basic scientific literacy would ask: if the fish near the plant have developed a third eye, what is happening to the people who have been drinking the water from the same source? The show answered that question in Season 8, but it answered it sideways. In the episode called The Springfield Files, Homer encounters what he believes is an alien in the woods near Springfield. The whole town panics. FBI agents Mulder and Scully are called in to investigate. The episode builds toward a dramatic reveal, and when the truth finally emerges, the alien turns out to be Mr. Burns. Burns has been undergoing a weekly medical treatment so intensive, so thoroughly loaded with chemicals and radiation therapy, that it causes his entire body to emit what the show describes as a healthy green glow. The treatment keeps him alive for exactly 1 more week. After each session, Burns wanders out of the facility in a dazed, euphoric state, stumbling through the woods like a creature from another world. He literally glows in the dark, and the people of Springfield see this glowing figure moving through the trees, and their first instinct is not, "There's a man suffering from extreme radiation exposure." Their first instinct is, "It must be an alien from space." That is how deep the denial runs. The cracked cooling towers have been visible on Springfield's skyline for decades. The fish have 3 eyes. The safety violations number in the hundreds. And when a man walks out of the plant glowing green, the town's collective mind reaches past every available local explanation and lands on extraterrestrial life. In the Simpsons movie, the evidence becomes impossible to dismiss entirely. Springfield's environmental contamination reaches a point so catastrophic that the Environmental Protection Agency, a real federal regulatory body operating within the show's fictional universe, determines that the town must be physically sealed under a massive glass dome to prevent its pollution from spreading to the rest of the country. The United States government looked at Springfield and concluded that the entire town was so toxic, so fundamentally contaminated, that the only viable solution was containment. Springfield is not just a polluted town. Springfield is classified as an environmental hazard by the federal government, and every resident who has spent years drinking that water, breathing that air, and living downwind of those cracked towers is still inside the dome when it comes down. Now, look at the residents themselves. Really look at them. Homer Simpson has a massive overbite, bulging eyes, 4 fingers on each hand, and a skull shape that defies human anatomy. His IQ qualifies as a clinical cognitive disability. His body can absorb physical punishment that would kill a normal person. He has been shot, electrocuted, fallen off cliffs, been hit by cars, walked away from explosions, and he has spent his entire adult career working in direct proximity to an active reactor core. Marge Simpson has the same bulging eyes, the same 4 fingers. Her hair grows straight upward in a tower that defies gravity and has maintained its exact shape for 36 years without change. Marge was briefly employed at the Springfield nuclear power plant herself. She was exposed to the same facility, the same violations, the same leaking radiation. And all 3 of her children were born after both parents had already been living in Springfield's contaminated environment for years. Bart, Lisa, and Maggie were all born in Springfield. all raised in Springfield, all drinking the same water, breathing the same air, growing up under the shadow of those cooling towers every day of their lives. And every single one of them displays physical characteristics that do not appear in normal human populations. The spiky hair that holds its shape without product, the overbites, the yellow skin. Here is the detail that makes the theory crystallize. When celebrities visit Springfield, when guest characters arrive from outside the town, they look different. Not slightly different, fundamentally different. Their proportions are more natural. Their eyes are shaped more normally. Their features more closely approximate actual human anatomy. The show draws outsiders with more realistic proportions than it draws Springfield residents. The accepted explanation is that this is just the show's art style, that this is how The Simpsons looks. But within the logic of the show's own universe, there is a visible, observable, consistent difference between people who live in Springfield and people who don't. The people inside the contamination zone look mutated. The people outside it look normal. Even the animals are affected. Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, has the same bulging eyes as his owners. The same proportions that deviate from real canine anatomy. Blinky the fish has 3 eyes. Springfield's wildlife is demonstrably altered by the power plant's runoff. The show shows you a 3-eyed fish and tells you directly, this is what the radiation is doing to living organisms in this environment. And then it asks you to believe that the exact same radiation has had 0 effect on the humans who have been living in that same environment, drinking that same water, for decades. Mr. Burns knows. He has always known. The show makes this explicit across multiple episodes. Burns funds private medical research. He has personal physicians. He undergoes weekly treatments that keep him alive through what amounts to chronic radiation poisoning. Burns understands radiation biology better than anyone in Springfield because he is personally dependent on managing its effects in his own body. He has the resources and the infrastructure. He has an entire pharmaceutical division capable of synthesizing experimental treatments. He knows what radiation does to biological systems because radiation is what keeps him alive. And he knows what his plant is doing to Springfield because Springfield is his laboratory. Homer's continued employment at the plant is not a mistake. It is not Burns being negligent or forgetful. When German investors briefly purchased the plant, the first thing they did was fire Homer. The second thing they did was assess the cost of bringing the facility up to regulatory code, and they nearly went bankrupt from the estimate alone. Burns bought the plant back and immediately rehired Homer. A competent safety inspector would shut that plant down within a week. Homer ensures the violations continue. The radiation keeps leaking. The water stays contaminated. Burns maintains his monopoly over Springfield's power supply, its economy, and, by extension, its entire population. A population whose cognitive function has been compromised by decades of neurological damage from chronic radiation exposure, leaving them unable to look at a 3-eyed fish and ask what it means for them. The crayon in Homer's brain is not the whole story. Season 12 reveals that Homer once had the crayon removed, and his intelligence immediately skyrocketed. He became articulate, perceptive, capable of understanding his world with a clarity he had never possessed before, and it made him miserable. He saw Springfield for what it was. He saw his job for what it was. He saw his life clearly, and it was unbearable. So he chose to have the crayon put back. He chose the fog. But the show never asks how a crayon got lodged in a child's brain in the first place without anyone noticing. How did Homer go through his entire childhood, his entire adolescence, his entire adult life, seeing doctors in Springfield getting checkups from Springfield's medical professionals without a single one of them finding a foreign object in his skull? Either every doctor in Springfield is catastrophically incompetent, or someone knew the crayon was there and chose not to remove it. And if Burns's influence extends into Springfield's healthcare infrastructure, if the doctors in town are looking the other way while radiation erodes their patients' neurons, then Homer's crayon is not an accident. It is a condition that was managed. The radiation theory does not explain one mystery about The Simpsons. It explains all of them. The characters do not age because their mutated biology has been altered at the cellular level. The town resets after catastrophic events because the population's memory function is compromised by chronic neurological damage. Homer survives injuries that should kill him because his body has adapted to radiation in ways that make him extraordinarily durable while leaving him cognitively devastated. Burns stays alive through treatments that would kill a normal human because he has been managing his own radiation exposure for over a century, using resources nobody else in town can access. And nobody in Springfield questions any of it because the same contamination that mutated their bodies also damaged the part of their brains responsible for critical thinking. Springfield is not a quirky cartoon town. It is a contamination zone. Its residents are not eccentric. They are symptomatic. And the nuclear power plant that dominates their skyline, that provides their electricity, that employs their neighbors and poisons their water and irradiates their children, is not a background gag. It is the cause. It has always been the cause. Every yellow face, every bulging eye, every impossible recovery from fatal injury, every forgotten catastrophe, every reset, it all traces back to the same cracked cooling tower, leaking the same invisible contamination into the same water supply, feeding into the same damaged minds that cannot figure out why their fish have 3 eyes and their children have 4 fingers. The Springfield nuclear power plant is not just part of the show. It is the show. And nobody in Springfield will ever figure that out, because the plant already made sure they cannot. Hey, if you're still with me, drop a comment with your location and the time you're watching from. And if this kind of deep dive is what you're here for, go ahead and subscribe. Now let's keep going. Section 2. Homer's Coma, the dream that became 30 years of television. Everything we just covered about the radiation theory, the mutations, the contamination, Burns's empire, the cognitive damage spreading through Springfield's population, take all of that and hold it in your mind for a moment. Because there is another theory that does not contradict the radiation theory. It absorbs it. It places everything we just examined inside a different container entirely, and the new container changes the meaning of all of it. What if the radiation theory is correct, but only inside the mind of a man who has been unconscious since 1993? On the 1st of April 1993, the 18th episode of the show's 4th season aired. Its title was So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. The premise was simple enough. Bart plays a series of April Fool's pranks on Homer, each one escalating beyond the last, until he takes one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop and places it inside an industrial paint shaker. The can is shaken until the pressure inside it is extreme. When Homer opens it, the explosion is violent enough to send him to the hospital. While Homer is lying in his hospital bed recovering, he spots a vending machine across the room. He climbs out of bed and reaches for a candy bar. The machine tips over. It crushes him, and Homer Simpson flatlines. He enters a clinically unconscious state, a real coma. Not a dream sequence, not a cutaway gag. A medically verified coma that lasts for 7 weeks. The episode ends with Homer seemingly waking up. Bart tearfully confesses at his bedside that the whole thing was his fault, and Homer springs awake and immediately starts strangling his son. The family laughs. Homer laughs. Everything returns to normal. The show tells you he woke up. Case closed, credits roll, and The Simpsons continues for 32 more years as though nothing happened. Except, in the final moments of that same episode, the show reveals that Homer lost 5% of his brain function during the coma. 5%. Permanently destroyed, never coming back. And Homer's response to learning that he has sustained irreversible brain damage is to laugh while saying, out loud, that he doesn't understand why he's laughing. The family finds this charming. Nobody is alarmed. The episode ends, and The Simpsons continues, unless Homer never woke up at all. This is the Homer coma theory, and it is the most debated, most internally consistent fan theory in the history of this show. The basic premise, originally proposed by a Reddit user going by the name HardTopAName, is simple and devastating. Homer did not regain consciousness in April of 1993. Every single episode that has aired since that date, every storyline, every character development, every guest appearance, every impossible event is a dream, being generated by the unconscious mind of a man lying in a hospital bed at Springfield General, slowly losing brain function while his family sits beside him and waits for him to open his eyes. Let's walk through the evidence carefully, because it deserves that kind of attention. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons was a specific kind of show, not realistic. Exactly, it was always a cartoon, and it never claimed to be otherwise, but the storylines were grounded in recognizable human experience. Homer tries to quit drinking. Marge considers the possibility of an affair. Lisa develops a crush on a substitute teacher and has her heart broken when he leaves. Bart struggles with his grades and faces genuine consequences, including the possibility of being held back a year. These are everyday problems told through the lens of satire, but they're rooted in things that real families experience. Financial stress, marital strain, children failing at school. The show's emotional core was built on domestic struggle, and the domestic struggle felt real enough to resonate. After the coma, everything changes. The shift is not subtle. Homer goes to space. Mr. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster. Homer becomes the leader of a vigilante group. Homer joins a secret society. Homer discovers that his mother has been living as a fugitive radical for 27 years. Homer meets God not once, but twice. Homer holds dozens of different jobs across a bewildering range of industries. He befriends celebrities, he travels to dozens of countries, he survives physical trauma that would kill a platoon of experienced soldiers. He falls from greater heights, endures more punishment, and recovers from more catastrophic injuries than any character in the history of animated television. The escalation from grounded family sitcom to surrealist adventure serial is so dramatic that even casual fans have noticed the tonal shift. Debates about when The Simpsons got bad have circulated on the internet for 20 years, and the question almost always points toward the same era. After season 4, after the pivot, after the show stopped feeling like itself, the coma theory has a precise answer. The Simpsons did not get bad. Homer's brain got worse. And the show's increasing detachment from reality is a direct reflection of the increasing deterioration of the mind generating it. Now here is the detail that genuinely unsettles people when they first encounter it. 6 months before the coma episode in the season 4 premiere, Homer, the heretic Homer, has a face-to-face conversation with God, an actual conversation. And during that conversation, God tells Homer something specific. He tells Homer that Homer will one day learn the meaning of life, but not yet. God says, with some warmth but with unmistakable directness, that Homer's time is coming. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. Read that again. God told Homer, in a canonical episode, that his time was nearly up, and 6 months later, Homer's conscious life ended. What the show presents as a quirky theological gag reads, under the coma theory, as prophecy. God was telling Homer that his waking life was about to end, and that everything that followed would be the dream of a man whose body was lying in a hospital bed while his mind tried to hold onto the world it loved. Let's go deeper, because the evidence doesn't stop at tone. The aging problem, the fact that nobody in Springfield ages, that Bart has been 10 years old for 36 years, and Lisa has been 8, and Maggie has been 1, is the single narrative detail that the coma theory explains more elegantly than any other theory in existence. Every other explanation for Springfield's frozen timeline requires some form of external mechanism. The radiation theory requires biological mutation at the cellular level. The cartoon logic explanation requires the audience to simply accept it as a convention. But the coma theory requires nothing external at all. Nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen mind of an unconscious man. Of course, Homer's children don't age. His unconscious brain cannot imagine them growing up because he was not there to see it happen. His wife doesn't age because the last time he saw her, she looked exactly like that. His friends don't change because his memory of them is fixed at the moment the vending machine fell. Homer's coma dream preserves his world exactly as it was on the day he lost it, because that is what comas do to the mind. They lock the world in place at the last moment of consciousness. And every episode since April of 1993 is Homer's brain running simulations of a life he is no longer living, using the only reference material it has available, the world as it existed on the day he went under. The celebrity appearances that flood the later seasons make sense under this reading, too. Homer's unconscious mind, lying in that hospital bed, receives ambient input from the world outside, sounds from the television in the room, conversations at his bedside, voices from a radio, cultural references drifting through the fog of unconsciousness. His brain hears names and voices and incorporates them into the dream. That is why later seasons are saturated with guest appearances. Springfield did not become a magnet for famous people. Homer's dreaming brain has been absorbing fragments of external media and weaving them into his internal world for decades. Every celebrity who appears in Springfield is a voice Homer heard through the fog of unconsciousness, translated into a dream character by a mind that is doing everything it can to keep the simulation populated and running. The show itself acknowledged this theory. In season 34, the episode Lisa the Boy Scout included a deliberately leaked, fake-deleted scene in which Homer wakes from a long coma and reveals that every outlandish episode was a dream. The show's writers created this specifically as a reference to the fan theory. They animated it, they showed it to the audience, and then they called it a hoax, a scene planted by hackers, something that wasn't real. But the fact that they made it tells you something important. The writers know about the theory. They have engaged with it. They have acknowledged, through the act of creating that scene, that the theory holds together well enough to be worth addressing. And their denial, their insistence that Homer is not in a coma, came wrapped inside an episode that explicitly depicted Homer waking from a coma. They showed you the truth and labeled it fiction, and the audience laughed, just as Homer laughed when he was told he had lost 5% of his brain. Executive producer Al Jean addressed the theory directly in 2015. He said it isn't true. He dismissed it as fan speculation. But Al Jean did not explain why nobody ages. He did not explain the tonal shift after season 4. He did not explain why God told Homer his time was coming 6 months before the coma. He did not explain why the show has become progressively more surreal and disconnected from reality with each passing season, exactly as you would expect from a dream being generated by a brain in slow deterioration. He said it isn't true, the interviewer moved on, and the theory lived on because the theory does something that no official explanation has ever managed to do. It makes the show make sense. All of it. The aging freeze, the tonal shift, the celebrity flood, the increasingly fantastical plots, the reset button that erases consequences between episodes, the fact that Homer can survive anything, endure anything, recover from anything because nothing is actually happening to his body. His body is in a hospital bed. Only his mind is in Springfield, and his mind cannot kill him because his mind is the one telling the story. There is one more dimension to this theory, and it is the part that stays with you long after you have closed the browser tab. If the coma theory is true, then the emotional core of The Simpsons is not comedy. It is something much quieter and much more devastating than comedy. Homer's deepest wish is so simple it is almost painful to say out loud. He wants his family. That is the whole thing. He wants Marge to still love him. He wants Bart to still be his mischievous little boy. He wants Lisa to still be playing her saxophone in the bedroom. He wants Maggie to still be small enough to hold in one arm. He wants Friday evening at the Simpsons house to last forever, the television on, the smell of something on the stove, the sound of the kids arguing in the next room. In the coma, it does. The dream gives him everything. His family preserved exactly as it was on the day he lost consciousness. His children never growing up, never leaving home, never becoming strangers he barely recognizes. His wife never aging, never pulling away, never choosing a life that doesn't include him. His world never ending. Homer's coma is not a nightmare. It is the closest thing to heaven that a man like Homer Simpson would ever ask for. A house on Evergreen Terrace where the kids are always young, and the beer is always cold, and nobody ever has to say goodbye. And every time Homer survives something impossible, every time the world resets, every time the credits roll and everything returns to normal, it is Homer's brain refusing to let the story end. Because if the story ends, if the dream stops, if the simulation finally crashes, then Homer has to wake up. And waking up means facing how much time has passed, how old his children really are, whether Marge waited, whether anyone is still sitting by his bed, or worse, not waking up at all. That is the coma theory. Homer Simpson has been dreaming since April of 1993. Every episode you have ever watched since that date is a love letter from an unconscious father to the family he cannot reach. The show will never confirm this, but it will never convincingly disprove it either, because the evidence is not hidden somewhere outside the show. It is baked into the structure of the show itself. Nobody ages. Reality keeps getting stranger. And Homer always finds his way home by the end of the episode, because in his dream, he never left. The coma theory does not exist in opposition to the radiation theory. It contains it. Homer's dreaming brain, shaped by a life lived inside Springfield's contaminated environment, generates a world in which everyone around him is visibly marked by that contamination, because that is the world he knew. The yellow skin, the four fingers, the mutations, the cognitive fog. They are features of Homer's dream because they were features of Homer's waking life. He is dreaming Springfield the only way he knows how to dream it, exactly as it was. And somewhere in that hospital, in a room that has grown quieter over the years, the monitors still show a heartbeat. The mind is still running. The dream is still going. The Simpsons is still on. And Homer Simpson is still coming home. Section 3. Who really shot Mr. Burns? The case. That was closed, not solved. We know the official answer. Season 7, Episode 1. Maggie Simpson pulled the trigger. Baby did it. Case closed. Except the case was never really closed, because the evidence does not add up the way the show wants you to believe it does. The more carefully you examine this mystery, the more closely you look at the clues, the investigation, the alternate endings, and the competing theories that have circulated for 30 years, the more clearly you see that the official verdict may be the single biggest cover-up in Springfield's history. Go back to the beginning. Season 6, Episode 25. Who shot Mr. Burns? Part 1. The summer of 1995. And The Simpsons pulled off something that no animated show had ever attempted before, a genuine whodunit cliffhanger. A mystery designed with such deliberate care that the show's creators invited viewers across America to participate in a national contest to guess the shooter. The winner would be animated into an actual episode. Fox promoted the event as though it were a cultural moment. America's Most Wanted produced a tie-in special called Springfield's Most Wanted, treating a fictional shooting as though it were a real unsolved case. The Simpsons wasn't just a television show that summer. It was a national puzzle, and America was obsessed with it. The premise of the mystery required Burns to have done something unforgivable enough to give every person in Springfield a credible motive, and he delivered. Burns had stolen an oil well from beneath Springfield Elementary, gutting the school's budget in a single move. He had bankrupted Moe's Tavern, shutting it down and leaving its owner destitute. He had created a sinkhole that swallowed the Springfield retirement castle. He had injured Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog. And for his grand finale, he built a mechanical device, a giant disc, and used it to block out the sun over the entire town, not metaphorically. Burns literally stole the sunlight from Springfield so that every resident would be forced to purchase electricity from his power plant. There would be no alternative, no solar power, no natural light. Just Burns's plant, Burns's prices, and Burns's complete control over the most basic resource the town possessed. When Smithers, his most devoted, most loyal employee, protested this plan on moral grounds, Burns fired him on the spot. After decades of service. Just gone. By the end of Part 1, every person in Springfield had a reason to want Burns dead. The show established motives for dozens of characters with care and specificity. Homer, because Burns had never once learned his name, despite Homer working for him for years, a humiliation that had quietly eaten away at Homer's sense of worth for his entire career. Bart and Lisa, because the school lost its oil revenue and its programs. Grandpa Simpson, because the retirement home was destroyed. Groundskeeper Willie, because he lost his job. Tito Puente, because Burns cut the music program. Moe, because his bar was gone. Even Smithers, freshly fired after a lifetime of loyalty and spiraling into alcoholism in the immediate aftermath. The entire town gathered at a public meeting to confront Burns. The tension was high enough that multiple characters were visibly carrying weapons. Then Burns collapsed, a single gunshot wound. He staggered to the town sundial and fell, his hands landing on two letters W and S, or, from Burns's perspective as he lay on the dial, M and S. The screen went black. America had to wait an entire summer. Here is what the show told us when the answer came. Part 2 aired in September of 1995. Chief Wiggum investigates. Smithers confesses almost immediately, but his confession falls apart. He was in a blackout at the time, and it turns out he actually shot someone else entirely. Old Jasper, in his wooden leg, at a different location. Wrong victim, wrong crime, wrong everything. Smithers is cleared. One by one, suspects are eliminated. Principal Skinner has an alibi. Moe has an alibi. Tito Puente has the greatest alibi in television history, a full musical number establishing that he channeled his anger into a samba rather than a bullet. The investigation stalls until police find an eyelash on Burns's suit. DNA analysis links it to a Simpson. Homer is arrested. His fingerprints are on the gun. He had the clearest motive in town. He is about to be convicted. Then Burns wakes up. He identifies the shooter. It was Maggie. According to Burns's account, he encountered Maggie in the parking lot after the town meeting. He attempted to take her lollipop. His gun fell from his holster during the struggle. Maggie picked it up. The gun discharged. Burns was shot. Mystery solved. The end. Except it was not the end, and the problems begin immediately. Start with the contest. Fox invited viewers across America to submit their guesses. Thousands upon thousands of entries were collected. According to the DVD commentary for these episodes, not a single person in the randomly selected sample of contest entries guessed the correct answer. Nobody won. The person who received the prize was chosen randomly, had guessed incorrectly, and received a cash payment instead of being animated into the show because the producers had no winner to animate. The show's writers acknowledged on that same commentary that they were aware of exactly one person who had posted the correct answer to a Simpsons news group on the night of the original broadcast. But this person was using a college internet account, and by the time the contest ended and producers tried to track them down, the account no longer existed. They issued an open invitation for this person to come forward on the DVD release. As far as anyone knows, they never did. Think about what this means. The show's creators designed a mystery, told the public it was solvable from the clues available in Part 1, built a national promotional campaign around it, and when the answer was revealed, essentially nobody had solved it. Either the clues were genuinely insufficient, the red herrings were too effective, or the answer did not logically follow from the evidence the way the show claimed it did. Now look at the sundial. Burns falls and his hands point to W and S, which the show interprets as M and S from his perspective standing for Maggie Simpson. But Burns himself stated, canonically and on camera, that his hands pointing at those letters was not intentional. He did not position himself to spell out his attacker's initials. He fell. The sundial clue, the central piece of physical evidence the show uses to support its conclusion, was explicitly described by the victim as coincidence. The most prominent clue in the most famous mystery in the show's history is meaningless according to the person it supposedly came from. Then there is the matter of the gun. Burns carried it in a holster. Shortly before the shooting, the holster is shown empty. The gun was already missing from his person before the attack occurred. This means the shooter was not someone who came to the town meeting armed and ready. Whoever shot Burns used Burns's own weapon, which means they found it or took it from him. The shooter was someone who did not bring a weapon, who did not plan to shoot anyone, who encountered Burns's gun through some combination of proximity and impulse. A baby finding a gun on the ground fits this profile. So does roughly a dozen other characters who were not carrying weapons that night. Then there is what Burns said in the moments before he was shot. "Oh, it's you." He recognized his attacker. He was not surprised. He was not afraid. He said, "It's you," the way a person greets someone familiar, someone they know, someone they do not consider a threat. Does Burns recognize Maggie Simpson? Has he ever had a meaningful interaction with her prior to this episode? The show establishes no relationship between Burns and Maggie before this event. Burns can barely remember Homer, and Homer has worked for him for years. The idea that Burns would see a baby in a parking lot and respond with calm, almost fond recognition, "Oh, it's you," does not track with a man who cannot remember his own employee's name. In season 18, Homer casually claims on camera that he was actually the one who shot Burns. He says it out loud. Nobody reacts, nobody investigates, nobody reopens the case. Homer confesses to the attempted murder of the richest man in Springfield, and the show treats the line as a throwaway joke and moves on. Either Homer is performing for attention, which is entirely plausible given his character, or the original verdict was wrong, and Homer knows exactly why it was wrong. If Homer did it, then Maggie was framed. A baby was blamed for a crime committed by her father, and Chief Wiggum's reasoning for closing the case, "No jury in the world would convict a baby," takes on a different character entirely. It sounds less like a conclusion and more like a justification, like someone with authority had already decided how this was going to end and found the cleanest available explanation. One of the most compelling alternate theories comes from a Reddit thread that argued Marge was the real shooter. The case is surprisingly strong. Marge had watched Burns destroy her children's school, injure her family's dog, and steal the sunlight from her town. She had motive. She is not a person who carries weapons to town meetings, which means she would not have been armed, but she was in that parking lot after the meeting, and Burns's gun was already missing from his holster. If Marge encountered Burns, if she found his gun, if something in that parking lot pushed her past the limit of what she could absorb. The theory also proposes that Burns would protect her. Burns developed an infatuation with Marge in an earlier episode. He would not name her as the shooter. He would wake up, look around the hospital room, and find the cleanest available alternative: a baby who cannot be prosecuted. An infant too young to understand the accusation, too young to deny it, too young to ever be punished. Chief Wiggum says it himself. No jury in the world would convict a baby. Maggie was the perfect fall figure, and if someone with resources and influence wanted to protect the real shooter, redirecting the investigation toward Maggie was the cleanest solution available. The show knows this reading exists. The final shot of Part 2 shows Maggie alone in the room after everyone has left. She checks to make sure no one is watching. And then she moves her pacifier in a motion that mimics pulling a trigger. The show wants you to read this as a confession, but you could also read it as a baby imitating something she witnessed. She was in that parking lot. She saw what happened. She is reenacting it the way babies reenact things, not because she did it, but because she saw it done, and the image is still with her. There were fully animated alternate endings. A complete alternate conclusion showing Smithers as the shooter was produced at full length, fully voiced, and shown in the 138th episode Spectacular. The character hosting that clip show, Troy McClure, dismisses the Smithers ending by saying it wouldn't have made sense because the Simpson DNA evidence would have to be ignored, which would be, in his words, downright nutty. The line is widely understood as a direct reference to the O.J. Simpson trial, in which a jury famously disregarded DNA evidence to reach an acquittal. The show is winking at the audience. It is telling you that ignoring evidence happens all the time. It is telling you that official answers and correct answers are not always the same thing. Early drafts had Barney Gumble as the shooter. The writers considered this seriously enough to plan a prison arc for him before abandoning it. The conclusion was not predetermined by the clues. The clues were adjusted after the fact to support whatever answer the writers eventually chose. The mystery was reverse engineered, and the writers have quietly acknowledged as much. And here is the question that nobody asks often enough. In a town where every single person had a motive, where dozens of characters were visibly carrying weapons, where the victim had just committed the most dramatic act of civic destruction in Springfield's history, how is it possible that only one person acted? Springfield is not a town known for restraint. These people riot at trivial provocations. They form mobs over misunderstandings. They once burned down their own town hall because of confusion about a bear. But when Burns blocks out the sun and threatens the survival of every living thing in the community, only one person pulls a trigger? Maybe the shooting was not as spontaneous as the official story suggests. Maybe someone planned it. Maybe someone with detailed knowledge of Burns's schedule, access to his weapon, and enough influence to redirect the investigation toward a suspect who could never be convicted. Maybe someone like that had made certain decisions before the town meeting ever began. The official answer is Maggie Simpson. The show committed to it. The writers stand behind it. But the contest that nobody won, the clues that Burns himself called meaningless, the alternate endings that were fully produced, Homer's unexamined confession in Season 18, and the final shot of Maggie performing a trigger motion in an empty room, all of it suggests that the greatest mystery in Simpsons history was never solved. It was closed. And in Springfield, as we will see again and again over the course of this next hour, those are two very different things. Section 4. MR. Burns the architecture of immortality. How is Mr. Burns still alive? This is not a rhetorical question. Within the established canon of The Simpsons, Charles Montgomery Burns is a medical impossibility. His age has been stated, implied, and contradicted across dozens of episodes, but every version of the timeline places his birth somewhere in the late 19th century. He has referenced personal memories from before the turn of the 20th century. He has described working relationships with historical figures who died before most of the show's audience was born. He has told stories about the early 1900s, about the years before and during the First World War, as though he experienced them firsthand because within the show's universe, he did. By conservative estimate, Burns is well over 100 years old. By the more liberal reading of the show's accumulated continuity, he might be approaching 140, and he does not just exist. He functions. He runs a multi-billion-dollar corporation with sustained operational efficiency. He manipulates municipal politics. He orchestrates schemes requiring long-term planning, precise timing, and a working understanding of modern technology, modern finance, and modern law. His body is frail, his physical strength is almost non-existent, his frame a collection of angles and protrusions that looks like it should have collapsed decades ago, but his mind is razor-sharp. Burns is arguably the most strategically intelligent character in Springfield, operating with a ruthlessness and sophistication that nobody in town can match, and he has been operating at that level for longer than any human being should be capable of sustained consciousness. The show addresses this directly in the Springfield Files. Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment so extreme that it causes his body to emit a visible green glow. The treatment keeps him alive for exactly 7 more days. Miss one appointment, and Burns dies. The margin for error is 0. His life is maintained the way you maintain a complex machine, through scheduled servicing, through precise intervention, through the constant management of systems that cannot sustain themselves. And the treatment involves radiation. Of course it does. The man who owns a nuclear power plant, the man whose facility has been leaking radioactive material into Springfield's environment for decades, is personally dependent on controlled radiation exposure to sustain his own biological function. Burns is not merely profiting from radiation, he is powered by it. His body has been so fundamentally altered by a lifetime of proximity to nuclear material that it can no longer maintain itself through normal cellular processes. He requires external radiation input the way other people require food and water. Remove the source and his system shuts down within a week. This explains something the show has depicted repeatedly but never fully addressed. Burns' immune system, or more accurately, his complete lack of one, and the paradoxical result this produces. In one of the series' most famous scenes, Burns visits a doctor who informs him that he is carrying every disease known to medical science. Every single illness simultaneously present in his body at the same time. The doctor explains that Burns' diseases exist in a state of perfect equilibrium, each one canceling out the effects of the others. He compares it to 3 people trying to fit through a doorway at once, with none of them able to get through because they are all blocking each other. Burns' illnesses are all trying to kill him at the same moment, but because they are all present simultaneously, they create a biological gridlock that prevents any single disease from progressing. The doctor's conclusion is that Burns is the sickest man in the United States and, paradoxically, functionally indestructible, because everything that should kill him is being neutralized by everything else that should kill him. The show plays this for laughs. It is one of the most quoted scenes in the series. But under the radiation theory, it makes a different kind of sense. Burns' body is not maintaining this disease equilibrium through any natural process. The weekly radiation treatments are doing it. They do not cure his diseases, they manage them. They keep every illness in a state of precise stasis, balanced against every other illness, preventing any single condition from gaining dominance. It is not medicine in any conventional sense. It is nuclear maintenance. Burns' body is a reactor, and his weekly treatments are the equivalent of adjusting the control rods to prevent a meltdown. Smithers, in this reading, is not merely a devoted assistant. He is the only person who fully understands how Burns' medical protocol functions. Smithers manages Burns' schedule. Smithers ensures that Burns makes every weekly appointment. Smithers monitors Burns' physical condition with a vigilance that the show has consistently depicted as bordering on obsessive. And the show has established repeatedly that if Smithers were ever removed from his position, if he were fired, or left voluntarily, or was simply unable to perform his duties, Burns would be helpless. Not emotionally helpless, physically helpless. Without Smithers managing the treatment schedule, Burns would miss a dose. The equilibrium would collapse. Every illness in his body would surge forward simultaneously. Smithers is not devoted to Burns purely out of love or professional loyalty. He is devoted because he knows, and Burns knows that he knows that his absence is a death sentence. Smithers keeps Burns alive through logistical competence, and that knowledge forms the foundation of everything between them. The relationship that looks like devotion is also, at its structural core, a medical necessity. Burns's connection to historical events adds another dimension to the immortality question. The show has depicted him interacting with or referencing an extraordinary number of historical moments, spanning from the early 20th century to the present day. He knew Howard Hughes. He attended Yale. He served in World War II, in a capacity the show describes as morally questionable. He stole a $1 trillion bill from the United States government during the war and kept it hidden for decades. He has referenced the Gilded Age not as history but as personal experience, as something he lived through, not something he read about. His family wealth predates the Industrial Revolution. The Burns dynasty, as the show depicts it, extends back centuries and represents one of the oldest and most continuously powerful lineages in American history. They were not merely wealthy. They were the kind of wealthy that builds infrastructure and charges everyone else to use it. The kind of wealthy that shapes the societies it inhabits from behind layers of institutional distance. Burns inherited this legacy and has been extending it for well over a century. He did not build an empire. He maintained one that was already ancient when he took control. The question the show never answers is whether Burns is unique in his longevity, or whether his family has always found methods to extend lifespans beyond normal human limits. Before nuclear radiation existed, before modern medicine provided the tools Burns currently relies on, did the Burns family use other methods to maintain their hold on power across generations? The show does not say, but it does establish that the Burns dynasty has been in continuous control of its fortune for longer than most American institutions have existed. That kind of multi-generational continuity does not happen through normal succession. It requires either extraordinary luck or extraordinary measures. And then there is Burns's relationship with death itself. Burns has come closer to dying than almost any other character in the show's history. He has been shot by Maggie Simpson. He has been hospitalized dozens of times. He has collapsed, been attacked, been abandoned in the wilderness, been subjected to conditions that should have ended his life many times over, and every single time, he returns. But his return is not like Homer's recovery from impossible injuries. Homer survives through a kind of passive indestructibility. The show simply will not let him die, because he is the main character. Burns survives through infrastructure, through money, through the machinery of wealth that ensures no matter what happens to his body, there will always be someone standing by with the resources and expertise to rebuild him. Homer's survival is passive. Burns's survival is engineered. Every dollar he has ever spent, every institution he has ever corrupted, every politician he has ever purchased, every physician he has ever retained, all of it serves a single operational purpose. Keep Burns alive. Keep the treatments coming. Keep the diseases in equilibrium. Keep the reactor running. Because if Burns dies, the empire he has spent a century and a half constructing dies with him. And empires do not allow themselves to die. The most unsettling dimension of the Burns immortality theory is not the possibility that Burns might live forever. It is the recognition that Springfield needs him to. The town's economy depends on the power plant. The power plant depends on Burns. Burns depends on the treatments. The treatments depend on the infrastructure that Burns's wealth provides. It is a closed loop, a self-sustaining system in which the man, the machine, and the money feed each other in a cycle that has no obvious exit point. Springfield cannot kill Burns because Springfield cannot survive without Burns. And Burns cannot die, because dying would mean the system he built would finally have to answer for what it has done to the people living inside it. Burns is the oldest man in Springfield. He is sustained by weekly radiation treatments, protected by a fortune that predates the nation, maintained by an assistant whose devotion is functionally a medical dependency, and surrounded by a population too compromised to seriously question why their employer glows in the dark and has personal memories of the Spanish-American War. He is not immortal in any mystical sense. He is something more mundane and more frightening than immortal. He is too expensive to die. Springfield will keep paying the bill for as long as Burns keeps the lights on, which, if his treatment schedule holds, will be indefinitely. That is the architecture of his survival. Not magic, not luck, a system. A system built over more than a century, piece by piece, institution by institution, with one overriding objective. And in Springfield, as in much of the world the show is quietly describing, systems built by the extremely wealthy tend to keep running long after any reasonable person would have expected them to stop. The Burns immortality theory sits at the intersection of the radiation theory and something larger, something the show has been circling for 36 years without ever landing on directly. The idea that in Springfield, ordinary people are subject to forces they cannot fully perceive, cannot effectively resist, and were never meant to understand. Burns is the most visible expression of those forces. He is their architect and their beneficiary. He is the person at the top of the structure, maintained by the same energy that damages everyone below him, using resources accumulated over generations to ensure that the structure never changes, that he never faces accountability, that the loop never breaks. He has been alive for over 100 years. He will continue to be alive. And every Monday morning, Homer Simpson will get in his car and drive to work. Section 5. Mona Simpson and the Conspiracy That Built Homer. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the official story. Abe Simpson, Homer's father, told him his mother had passed away when Homer was young. He showed Homer a grave. Homer mourned in the abstract, the way a person mourns something they cannot quite remember. He grew up believing he was a boy whose mother had died, whose father was too cold and too distant to fill the space she left. That belief shaped everything about him. His desperate need for approval, his clinginess toward Marge, his terror of abandonment, his compulsive need to be liked by the people around him, his willingness to endure humiliation and degradation from his employer rather than risk losing the one stable thing in his life. Homer Simpson's entire personality, every quirk, every flaw, every endearing and infuriating thing about him is a coping mechanism built on top of maternal loss. And the loss was a lie. Season 7, the episode called Mother Simpson. The 19th of November, 1995. Widely considered one of the greatest episodes in the series. Homer fakes his own death to avoid working a Saturday. He pushes a dummy off a cliff near the power plant, and the town believes he's gone. When Marge insists he go to the Hall of Records and correct the error, Homer makes a discovery that changes his life. According to municipal records, his mother is alive. She never died. The grave Abe showed him was not hers. It was the grave of Walt Whitman, the poet. Abe had been using a famous writer's headstone as his wife's burial marker for Homer's entire childhood. Homer finds Mona at a cemetery, visiting what she believes is her son's grave. She does not recognize him at first. He has changed. He has grown into someone she never got to know. But when Homer proves who he is, they have a reunion that the show handles with a gentleness that is genuinely moving a grown man and his mother, separated for 27 years, finding each other beside a headstone that belongs to neither of them. Then Mona tells him the truth. She did not die. She did not leave because she stopped loving him. She left because she had to. Because the man who owned the power plant, the man Homer would grow up to work for without ever knowing the full history, had destroyed her life and driven her underground. The story begins in 1969. Mona Simpson was a housewife. She was married to Abe. They had a young son named Homer. She was living an ordinary, quiet life in Springfield while the world outside was burning through the civil rights movement, the counterculture, the protests against Vietnam. And then something shifted in her. The show depicts it with some absurdity but genuine emotional weight. Mona was radicalized. She joined a group of activists, hippies is what the show calls them, though it also makes clear that their cause was legitimate. They targeted a biological weapons laboratory owned by Mr. Burns. Let that settle for a moment. Mr. Burns did not just own a nuclear power plant with 342 safety violations. He owned a germ warfare facility, a laboratory specifically designed to produce biological weapons, operating in Springfield, the same town where children were playing in parks, where families were living their lives without any idea that the wealthiest man in their community was manufacturing weaponized diseases in a building down the road. Burns was running a nuclear power plant and a biological weapons program simultaneously in the same community, and the people of Springfield had no idea. Mona and her group broke into the lab. They detonated what the show describes as an antibiotic bomb, a device that destroyed the biological agents stored inside the facility. During the raid, they accidentally cured the asthma of the facility's security guard, who happened to be Clancy Wiggum, the man who would later become Springfield's chief of police. The raid succeeded. The weapons were destroyed. But Mona made one mistake. As the group fled, she stopped to help someone who had been knocked down in the chaos. That someone was Mr. Burns. She reached down to help the man whose weapons she had just eliminated, and Burns looked up and saw her face. He identified her. He reported her to the FBI. From that moment, Mona Simpson was a fugitive. She could not go home. She could not contact her family. She could not hold her son or tell him why she was leaving. She kissed Homer goodbye while he was asleep and disappeared into the night. He woke up and she was gone. Abe told him she was dead. And Homer spent the next 27 years of his life believing he was the kind of person a mother would rather disappear from forever than stay for. Now, here is where the conspiracy takes shape. Burns did not simply identify Mona to the FBI and move on. He pursued her. He maintained an active grudge against a woman who had destroyed his weapons laboratory, and he used his resources, his connections, his influence, his money to ensure she could never safely return to her family. When Mona finally came back to Springfield in Season 7, Burns recognized her almost immediately through a taxi window. He called the authorities. The FBI appeared at the Simpson house within hours. Mona had to run again. Homer had to say goodbye to his mother for the second time. And this time, he knew exactly who forced her out. He knew that the man responsible for destroying his family was his own employer. Homer works for Burns. Homer has worked for Burns his entire adult life. He earns his paycheck from the man who stole his mother. He clocks in every morning at the facility owned by the person responsible for the most defining wound of his childhood. And Homer does not connect the dots. He does not confront Burns. He does not quit. He does not even appear to fully process the relationship between the billionaire who signs his checks and the billionaire who drove his mother into hiding. Homer's inability to make this connection is not played as a punchline. It is played as tragedy, quiet, accumulating, almost unbearable if you let yourself sit with it. Because Homer Simpson is not capable of making connections like this. His brain does not work that way. The crayon, the radiation, the decades of cognitive erosion from living inside Springfield's contaminated environment, Homer is too damaged to see the architecture of his own suffering. That is the conspiracy. Burns did not just ruin Mona's life, he engineered Homer's. By driving Mona away when Homer was a child, Burns ensured that Homer would grow up emotionally damaged, desperate for approval, incapable of challenging authority, terrified of abandonment. The perfect employee, a man who would work at a dangerous facility for decades without serious complaint, because the alternative, being alone, being unloved, being abandoned again, was worse than any job could be. Homer does not work at the nuclear power plant because he is too limited to find better employment. Homer works at the nuclear power plant because Burns broke him as a child, and the broken version of Homer is exactly the kind of worker Burns needs. The show confirms the structural dimensions of this arrangement in a later revelation. Burns and Grandpa Simpson struck a deal. Burns had committed a crime and Grandpa discovered it. In exchange for Grandpa's silence, Burns guaranteed that Homer would have a job at the plant for life. No matter how many mistakes he made, no matter how incompetent he proved himself to be, no matter how many times he should, by any reasonable workplace standard, have been terminated, 742 documented errors, and Homer was never permanently let go. Homer's job security was not a cartoon convenience or a writing shortcut. It was a contractual obligation brokered in silence between his father and his mother's persecutor, maintained in secret for decades, and never explained to Homer, because explaining it would mean explaining everything else. 3 generations of Simpsons, broken by one man's grudge. Mona fought back against Burns's weapons program and lost everything. She lost her home, her family, her son's childhood, 27 years of her life. Abe covered up the truth and made a deal with the person who destroyed his wife. Homer inherited the consequences, the emotional damage, the cognitive impairment from a contaminated environment, the corrosive belief that he was fundamentally unworthy of being stayed for, and spent his entire adult life working for the man responsible, never understanding why his life felt so heavy. And Burns won. Burns has always won. Because in Springfield, the person with the money writes the rules. And the rules say Homer Simpson will work at the power plant until he dies, because his grandfather made a deal, because his mother made a choice, because the richest man in town needed a broken man in Sector 7G. Homer was broken before he ever clocked in on his first day. The show proved this in the episode where Homer's crayon is removed. With the obstruction gone, Homer becomes brilliant, articulate, perceptive. capable of understanding the world around him in ways he has never been able to before. The man Homer could have been the man he would have been if his mother had stayed, if Burns had not intervened, if the system had not conspired to keep him small and compliant. That man exists inside Homer's skull, trapped behind a crayon in 30 years of environmental contamination. Present, aware, unreachable. Homer chose to have the crayon put back because being intelligent in Springfield was unbearable. He saw the town too clearly. He understood his situation too well, and what he understood was something he could not live with. But the choice was never really his. Homer was never meant to be intelligent in Springfield. Burns made sure of that decades ago, on the night a 6-year-old boy woke up and found his mother gone. Mona Simpson died in a later season. Her death scene is one of the show's quietest and most devastating moments. Homer sits beside her. He holds her hand. He watches the mother he barely knew slip away from him for the last time. No joke follows it. No cutaway erases it. No reset absorbs the weight of it. Just a man and his mother, and the 27 years between them pressing down on the small space they briefly shared. The Simpsons is a comedy. It has always been a comedy. But underneath the jokes, underneath 36 seasons of Homer falling down and getting back up, there is a story about a family that was systematically dismantled by one man's power and one town's unwillingness to resist it. Mona fought and lost everything. Abe made a deal with the source of the damage. Homer inherited the wound and never fully understood what caused it. And Burns won, as he always wins, because in Springfield, as in the world Springfield quietly describes, the man with the longest reach and the deepest pockets almost always does. Section 6. Maggie Simpson, the quiet apex. Maggie Simpson does not talk. She does not walk reliably. She communicates primarily through pacifier sounds, pointed looks, and the occasional gesture that carries more weight than anything anyone else in her family has ever said out loud. She is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. And in that time, without saying a word, she has accomplished more than every other member of the Simpson family combined. She shot a billionaire. She led a daycare rebellion against a tyrannical caretaker. She has saved her family from multiple life-threatening situations. She has demonstrated problem-solving abilities that exceed those of adults many times her age. She has been tested and found to possess intelligence at a level that standard measurement tools cannot adequately quantify. And through all of it, through every remarkable thing she has ever done, she has maintained her silence. Not because she cannot speak, because she has chosen not to. Let's start with the shooting, because it is the act that defines her in the popular imagination, even though it may actually be the least interesting thing about her. Whether or not Maggie intentionally pulled that trigger, and we covered the arguments in detail earlier, the aftermath is what matters. A baby was identified as the person who shot the richest man in town. The police investigated. Evidence was examined. And the official conclusion was, yes, this infant committed an act of violence against a grown adult, and there is nothing anyone can do about it, because no jury would convict a baby. And that was the end of it. But look at the final shot of that episode one more time. Everyone has left the room. Maggie is alone. She looks around carefully, deliberately, not randomly checking to confirm that nobody is watching. And then she moves her pacifier in a motion that mimics pulling a trigger. That is not reflexive behavior. That is not a baby randomly moving her mouth. That is a 1-year-old child demonstrating awareness of what happened, awareness that the act she committed or witnessed had significance, and awareness that performing that gesture in front of other people would have consequences. She waited until she was alone. She checked her surroundings. Then she reenacted the moment in private. That sequence requires situational awareness, memory, caution, and impulse control. Those traits are not associated with infants. They are associated with someone who understands exactly what they are doing and has decided that strategic silence is the optimal approach. Now consider The Longest Daycare, the 7-minute theatrical short released in 2012, screened in cinemas before Ice Age, Continental Drift, nominated for an Academy Award. 7 minutes of Maggie Simpson demonstrating intelligence that would be remarkable in an adult, let alone a child who cannot reliably walk across a room without falling. The premise is simple. Maggie is dropped off at the Ayn Rand School for Tots, a daycare center run with authoritarian precision. Inside the facility, she encounters a caterpillar about to become a butterfly. She wants to protect it. Another baby Gerald, the recurring bully, wants to destroy it. What follows is a miniature action film in which Maggie outmaneuvers the bully, the daycare staff, and the facility's security systems through observation, planning, improvisation, and adaptive problem solving that most adults struggle to replicate in high-pressure situations. She does this without speaking a word. She reads the environment, identifies threats, develops strategies in real time, and executes multi-step plans requiring timing, spatial reasoning, and the ability to predict the behavior of the people around her. Her body can barely keep up with her mind. She falls. She stumbles. She crawls when her plan requires speed, but her decision-making is clean and consistent. Every choice is correct. Every move is optimized. She is operating at a cognitive level that her physical development cannot support, and she succeeds anyway because her intelligence compensates for every limitation her body imposes. The show has tested Maggie's intelligence on multiple occasions. The results vary by episode, but the pattern is consistent. Maggie is not a normal baby. In certain episodes, her intelligence registers as extraordinary off the charts, beyond what standardized testing was designed to measure. The show delivers this information quickly, lets the laugh track roll, and moves on. But the pattern accumulates over 36 years into something that cannot be dismissed as coincidence. Maggie consistently, repeatedly, across dozens of episodes and contexts, demonstrates cognitive abilities that no one-year-old should possess, and nobody in the Simpson household notices. The family is too busy managing Homer's disasters, absorbing Bart's escalating provocations, and responding to Lisa's crusades to pay sustained attention to the baby who has been quietly solving problems in the background for as long as anyone can remember. Which brings us to the central theory about Maggie. Her silence is not developmental delay. It is strategic. Look at what happens to the intelligent women in this family. Lisa Simpson is brilliant, a genuine prodigy with an IQ that dwarfs everyone in her household and most of the adults in Springfield. And what has that intelligence delivered to her? Isolation, dismissal, a daily experience of being the smartest person in the room and having that count for essentially nothing. Lisa speaks up and gets ignored. Lisa challenges authority and gets punished. Lisa tries to improve the world around her and gets worn down by the accumulated weight of a community that does not want to be improved. Her intelligence is her greatest gift and her greatest burden, because she uses it visibly. She announces herself. She wears her ability on the outside, and the room responds by demonstrating, consistently, that none of it matters here. Maggie has watched this happen. She has been watching it happen since the day she was born. She has observed her brilliant sister fight every single day for recognition and receive resistance in return. She has seen what becomes of the most gifted person in the family when that person insists on being seen. And Maggie learned the opposite lesson. Silence is protection. Invisibility is a form of power. The less attention you attract, the more freely you can operate. The further you remain beneath the threshold of notice, the more you can accomplish in the spaces nobody is monitoring. Consider how Maggie's most significant actions have played out. The shooting. The investigation focused on every other suspect in town before anyone seriously considered the baby, because who suspects a baby? The daycare rebellion in the longest daycare. It succeeded precisely because nobody monitors infants closely enough to see them organizing. Every heroic act, every display of intelligence, every moment where Maggie makes the decisive move that saves the situation, it happens below the radar, in the margins, in the spaces where nobody is looking. And Maggie has ensured that nobody looks by maintaining the most effective disguise available, the performance of being exactly what everyone already expects a baby to be. Quiet, passive, helpless, dependent. She is none of those things. She is the opposite of all of them. She may be the most capable member of the Simpson family. She has simply spent 36 years making absolutely certain that nobody figures that out. Connect this to the radiation theory. If Springfield's contaminated environment creates mutations, and if those mutations affect each person differently based on some combination of genetics, exposure, and biological predisposition, then Maggie represents something like the opposite extreme from Homer. Homer's mutation reduced his intelligence to clinical disability. Maggie's amplified hers to a level that cannot be properly measured. Same environmental contamination, same family, same water, same air, same proximity to the cracked cooling towers. But where the father's mind was diminished, the youngest child's was supercharged. Homer and Maggie are two sides of the same radioactive phenomenon. He is what happens when mutation takes something away. She is what happens when mutation gives something extraordinary. If the coma theory is true, Maggie's genius takes on a different meaning entirely. If Homer is dreaming, if every episode is the product of an unconscious mind trying to hold on to his family, then Maggie's intelligence is Homer's most profound hope for his youngest child, projected onto the dream. He cannot see her grow up. He cannot watch her develop. He cannot hear her speak or see her walk or learn what kind of person she becomes. So in the dream, he makes her extraordinary. He gives her an intelligence that transcends her age. He makes her capable of things no real baby could accomplish. Because in his coma, Homer needs to believe that Maggie will be okay. He needs to believe that his smallest child, the one who cannot yet speak, the one who cannot yet walk across a room without stumbling, carries inside her something that will protect her long after he is gone. In that reading, Maggie's genius is not a mutation. It is a father's prayer, the deepest wish of an unconscious man for the child he was not there to watch grow up. But back in Springfield, in whatever waking world still exists, there is a darker reading available. Maggie does not speak because she has observed, with exceptional precision, that speaking gets you nothing in this town. Intelligence is not rewarded in Springfield. It is managed, contained, quietly discouraged. She watched Lisa learn this the hard way over years and decades of struggle. Maggie learned it faster, at a younger age, and drew the more strategic conclusion. She watches everything. She remembers everything. She understands everything. And she waits. For what? The show never tells us. Maggie's endgame, what she is building toward, what she will eventually decide to do with 36 years of observation and extraordinary cognitive capacity, is the last truly unsolved mystery in the Simpson family. The show has never definitively revealed what she is capable of at full expression. We have seen glimpses. We have seen her shoot a man. We have seen her command a room full of babies. We have seen her confirm or deny the significance of events with a single nod that the family trusts implicitly, without discussion, without question. Maggie Simpson is 1 year old. She cannot walk without falling. She cannot reliably form sentences. And she is the most powerful person on Evergreen Terrace. She has simply not yet decided what to do about it. Maybe that is the most unsettling thing about her. Not what she has done, but what she is waiting to do. Behind the pacifier, behind those enormous patient eyes, behind 36 years of deliberate, calculated silence, something is thinking. Something is planning. Something has been watching this family and this town and this system with an intelligence that nobody suspects and nothing has yet managed to contain. When Maggie finally acts, when she decides the moment has arrived, Springfield will not see it coming. That is precisely how she designed it. Section 7. The Principal and the Pauper Springfield's Social Contract with Lies. Season 9, Episode 2. The Principal and the Pauper. The 28th of September, 1997. This episode detonated inside the show's fan community when it aired, and the blast radius has never fully subsided. 28 years later, fans cite it as the moment The Simpsons went wrong. The moment the writers stopped caring about their own continuity. The moment the show betrayed its audience. But what if the fans have been reading the betrayal backwards? What if this episode did not break The Simpsons? What if it revealed what The Simpsons had always been? Here is what happens. Springfield Elementary holds an event honoring Principal Seymour Skinner's 20 years of service to the school. During the celebration, a stranger walks through the door, a man nobody recognizes. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner. The real Seymour Skinner, a decorated Vietnam War veteran who was believed dead after being captured as a prisoner of war in Southeast Asia. He survived. He escaped. And he came home to discover that someone else had been living his life for the past 2 decades. The man Springfield has known as Principal Skinner is an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before Vietnam, Tamzarian was a petty criminal from the wrong side of the tracks, a young man with no future and no apparent way of acquiring one. He was drafted, served in the same unit as the real Skinner, and when Skinner was captured and presumed killed, Tamzarian felt responsible. He traveled to Springfield to deliver the news of Skinner's death to his mother Agnes. When he arrived, Agnes assumed he was her son. She needed him to be her son. And Tamzarian, who had never been wanted by anyone, who had never had a family or a home or an identity worth keeping, just agreed. He became Seymour Skinner. He took the name, the rank, the mother, the life, and he maintained the fiction for 20 years. Until the real Skinner walked through the door and the whole thing collapsed. Now here is where Springfield does something remarkable. The town holds a meeting. Both men are present. The truth is fully exposed. Every person in Springfield knows their principal is a fraud. The man who has been running their school, participating in their community, living as their neighbor for 2 decades, is not who he claims to be. And the town votes. Not on whether to prosecute Tamzarian, not on whether to restore the real Skinner's identity and give him back the life that was stolen from him. The town votes on whether to acknowledge the truth at all. And the verdict is unanimous. They vote to keep the lie. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree that the imposter is the real Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the war hero who survived captivity in Southeast Asia, escaped and came home to find his entire life occupied by someone else, is tied to a railroad car and physically expelled from Springfield. And the judge makes it explicitly illegal to ever mention the truth again, under penalty of torture. Sit with that for a moment. A community with definitive proof that a major public figure had been living a stolen identity for 20 years, with the actual victim of that theft standing directly in front of them, chose the fake. They sentenced the truth to exile and made it a criminal act to speak its name. Fans hated this episode. Harry Shearer, who provides the voices for both Skinner and Burns, stated his displeasure publicly. Critics argued the episode destroyed Skinner's character by revealing that everything established about him was founded on fiction, his military record, his relationship with his mother, his dynamic with every other character, his entire personality, all of it built on a sustained lie. The episode is consistently ranked among the worst in the series. It has been called the point where the show abandoned its own continuity, the moment a beloved character was sacrificed for a twist that served no narrative purpose. But here is the thing that nobody discussing this episode wants to fully acknowledge. The episode is completely honest about what Springfield is. It says the quiet part out loud. Springfield has always operated this way. The town has always chosen comfortable falsehoods over uncomfortable truths. The town has always found ways to collectively forget whatever does not serve the agreed-upon narrative. The only difference is that this episode showed you the mechanism. It showed you the vote. It showed you the legal decree. It showed you the literal expulsion of truth from the community. Every other time Springfield forgets a catastrophe, ignores a contradiction, or resets to normal after something world-altering, it happens off-screen. Between episodes, in the white space the show never shows you. The Principal and the Pauper is the one time the show let you watch the forgetting happen in real time. How many times has Springfield experienced events that should permanently alter its reality? The town has been destroyed and rebuilt multiple times. It has been sealed under a dome by the federal government. It has survived nuclear near misses, environmental catastrophes, and the literal theft of its sunlight. And every single time, by the next episode, everything is back to normal. Nobody references the previous disaster. Nobody shows signs of accumulated trauma. The slate is clean. The show's writing staff calls this episodic storytelling. The coma theory calls it a dreaming brain resetting between cycles. The radiation theory calls it cognitive damage from chronic exposure. But the Principal and the Pauper offers a fourth explanation that does not require any of those mechanisms. Springfield resets because the town chooses to reset. Collectively, deliberately, through an unspoken social contract that operates something like this. We will not acknowledge what happened. We will maintain the agreed-upon version of reality. We will treat the lie as truth and the truth as a violation, and anyone who breaks this contract will be removed from the community. This is not a cartoon trope. This is how real communities function. Small towns in particular have a well-documented capacity for collective denial. Scandals get buried, crimes get absorbed into community memory in distorted forms. Uncomfortable truths get revised and revised again until the official version is the only version anyone living there can access. The Principal and the Pauper did not break The Simpsons. It diagnosed Springfield. It showed the town's collective amnesia for what it actually is. Not a glitch in the storytelling, not lazy writing, but a defense mechanism employed by a population that cannot afford to confront the reality of its situation. Because confronting that reality has a chain of consequences that the town is not equipped to survive. If Springfield remembered the dome, it would have to acknowledge the pollution. If it acknowledged the pollution, it would have to confront the power plant. If it confronted the power plant, it would have to challenge Burns. If it challenged Burns, the economy would collapse. If the economy collapsed, the town would die. So it forgets. It votes to forget. It makes remembering illegal. And anyone who insists on the truth gets tied to a train and sent away. The real Seymour Skinner was Springfield's most visible test of this mechanism. A man arrived with irrefutable proof that the official narrative was false, and the town's response was to criminalize the proof and exile the messenger, the last honest man in a community that had made honesty a punishable offense. If the coma theory is true, this episode takes on an additional layer of meaning. If everything since season 4 is Homer's dream, then Homer's unconscious mind invented a scenario in which an entire community votes to sustain a lie because that is what Homer needs to believe. He needs to believe that lies can be maintained forever through collective agreement. He needs to believe that a stolen identity can become real if enough people decide to treat it as real. Because Homer's coma is itself a stolen life, a dream masquerading as reality. And as long as Springfield keeps voting to maintain the fiction, Homer never has to wake up. Armin Tamzarian is still Seymour Skinner. Springfield is still pretending everything is fine. And somewhere out there, the real Seymour Skinner is still in exile, expelled from his own life, still attached to that train, sent away because he had the misfortune of arriving in a town that had already decided what was true and had no interest in revising its decision. The last honest man, in a town that made honesty illegal. Section 8. The predictions prophecy, pattern, and the feedback loop. The Simpsons predictions phenomenon has become, in the 2020s, almost as famous as the show itself. The idea that a cartoon sitcom from 1989 has been accurately forecasting world events for 36 years has entered mainstream consciousness in a way that the show's actual storylines, in many cases, have not. People who have not watched The Simpsons in 20 years share clips online whenever reality appears to catch up to something the show depicted first. Let's get the headline cases out of the way because you have probably seen most of them. In the year 2000, the episode called Bart to the Future depicted a future in which Lisa Simpson becomes the first female president of the United States. In that same episode, Lisa's predecessor in the White House is identified as Donald Trump. The episode aired 16 years before Trump won the 2016 presidential election. 16 years. The show depicted a Trump presidency as a joke about the absurd direction American celebrity culture was heading, and then American celebrity culture headed exactly in that direction. The screenshots went viral. The clips circulated endlessly. The Simpsons predicted Trump became a meme that transcended the show's actual audience and entered the broader cultural conversation. That is just the headline. In 1995, the show depicted a device that looks strikingly similar to a modern smartwatch. In 1994, Homer went to space alongside Buzz Aldrin, decades before commercial space tourism became a real industry. In 1998, Homer discovered a mathematical equation that appears to describe the mass of the Higgs boson particle, a particle that would not be experimentally confirmed until 2012. In 1999, Homer proposed a theory that the universe might be shaped like a donut, and years later, cosmologists found radiation patterns suggesting the universe might actually be torus-shaped. In 1993, an episode about a flu virus originating in Asia and spreading to Springfield, causing mass panic, shortages, and a frantic search for a cure aired 27 years before COVID-19. During that fictional outbreak, the townspeople accidentally released a swarm of killer bees, which felt genuinely strange when Asian giant hornets dubbed murder hornets appeared in the United States during the real pandemic of 2020. In 1996, the episode Homer Palooza featured a joke in which hip-hop group Cypress Hill accidentally booked the London Symphony Orchestra. That exact collaboration happened in 2024, when Cypress Hill performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall. 28 years between the joke and the reality. In 1998, the show depicted Disney acquiring 20th Century Fox, which actually happened in 2019. Across multiple episodes, the show depicted video calling technology, autocorrect failures, and various dimensions of surveillance culture years before those technologies became ubiquitous in everyday life. The list is long enough to fill its own dedicated video. And every time a new apparent prediction emerges, the internet responds with the same mixture of astonishment and unease. How are they doing this? Are the writers somehow operating with foreknowledge? Is there something embedded in the show that we do not fully understand? The people who actually make the show have a much simpler answer. Al Jean, who has been an executive producer since the show's earliest seasons, has addressed the prediction phenomenon directly. His explanation is blunt and doesn't attempt to be anything other than what it is. If you throw enough darts, you will hit some bullseyes. That is it. That is the whole explanation from inside the show. The Simpsons has produced nearly 800 episodes over 36 years, and each episode contains dozens of jokes, references, and satirical observations about American culture, technology, politics, and society. When you generate that volume of content over that length of time, statistical probability guarantees that some of it will align with future events. Producer Bill Oakley put it even more plainly. The episodes are so old that history simply repeats itself. The show produced enough content covering enough subjects that some of those subjects were always going to come back around. Organizations like Snopes have systematically examined the most widely shared predictions and found that the majority of them have mundane explanations. The writers did not predict Trump's presidency. They observed that Trump had been publicly flirting with running for office since the late 1980s and wrote a joke about the logical conclusion of celebrity politics. They did not predict the Disney-Fox merger. They observed that media consolidation was an accelerating trend and imagined a gag about a corporation consuming its competitors. They did not predict smartwatches. They looked at the trajectory of miniaturizing technology and imagined where it was going. The Simpsons writing staff has historically been among the most formally educated in American television. Multiple writers hold degrees from Harvard, Yale, and other research universities. Many have backgrounds in mathematics, hard sciences, computer science, and political theory. These are not people generating random guesses. They are highly educated, exceptionally attentive observers of American culture who spend their careers analyzing trends, identifying patterns, and extrapolating current trajectories to their logical and frequently absurd conclusions. They read the present more carefully than most, and then push it forward. They are not predicting the future. They are doing something that looks like prediction from the outside but is actually something else. Close observation of where things are already heading. But here is where the phenomenon becomes genuinely strange. Because while this explanation accounts for most of the predictions, it does not account for all of them. Some of the coincidences are specific enough that statistical probability starts to feel like an insufficient framework. The Trump prediction did not just suggest that a celebrity might one day run for president. It named Trump specifically. The episode showed him descending an escalator in a sequence that visually mirrors the announcement he made in June of 2015. The Siegfried and Roy episode did not just make a general joke about the dangers of exotic animals. It depicted a white tiger attacking one of the performers in a way that closely resembles what happened in 2003 when Roy Horn was critically injured during a live performance. These are not vague trend extrapolations. These are specific details, aligning with specific future events in ways that can make you sit back and look at the screen differently. And this is where the most interesting theory about the prediction phenomenon lies. The Simpsons does not predict the future. The Simpsons shapes the future, not through anything mystical or conspiratorial. Through cultural influence, and the show has enough of that to make the mechanism real. The Simpsons is one of the most watched, most quoted, most referenced pieces of American media in history. It has been running for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. Its observations have become embedded in the way Americans understand their own culture. Its jokes have become reference points that structure how people think about the subjects those jokes address. When The Simpsons makes a joke about a Trump presidency, that joke enters the cultural bloodstream. Millions of people encounter it. It becomes something people mention in conversation. It colors how they process news coverage of Trump over the following years. It makes the idea of a Trump presidency feel less like an implausible shock and more like an eventual punchline. The joke does not predict the event. The joke makes the event feel familiar when it arrives. It primes the cultural imagination to receive a certain future as recognition rather than revelation. We have seen this before. The Simpsons already told us this would happen. The feeling is not prophecy, it is the result of having been culturally prepared for the outcome years in advance. The show did not predict Disney buying Fox. It made media consolidation feel inevitable by treating it as obvious satire. When Disney actually acquired Fox, the cultural response was not widespread shock. It was something closer to resigned acknowledgement. Of course they did. The Simpsons told us this was coming. The show's satire does not forecast the future. It normalizes the future. It takes trends already in motion and depicts them as accomplished facts, and when those facts materialize, the audience experiences a recognition that feels like prophecy from the inside. Springfield does not reflect America. America has been gradually becoming Springfield. The show held up a mirror for 36 years, and we stared into it long enough that we started to resemble what we saw. The nuclear power plant run by an unaccountable billionaire. The incompetent safety systems staffed by people too damaged to recognize their own compromise. The government that oscillates between fecklessness and heavy-handed overreach. The population too distracted, too tired, or too cognitively worn down to notice the structures extracting value from their lives. The endless cycle of catastrophe, brief outrage, and collective forgetting. Springfield is not a prediction of where America was heading. Springfield is a diagnosis of where America already was when the show began. The writers just wrote it down first. There is one final piece to this that matters. The Simpsons has also made predictions that did not come true. Thousands of them. Jokes about jetpacks and moon colonies that never materialized. Jokes about political outcomes that went the other direction. Jokes about cultural shifts that did not happen. Nobody screenshots those. Nobody shares them. Nobody builds theories around the failed predictions, because confirmation bias only operates in one direction. We remember the hits and we forget the misses. When you produce nearly 800 episodes containing thousands of satirical observations about American culture, and then filter all of that output through the confirmation bias of internet sharing, where only the accurate predictions get circulated and preserved while the inaccurate ones disappear, you end up with a highlight reel that looks supernatural. A record of apparent prophecy built entirely from selection. The predictions are not supernatural. They are the natural result of a brilliantly written show running for an impossibly long time, staffed by highly educated observers of American culture, producing more satirical content than any other show in television history, and then having that content filtered through the most powerful confirmation bias engine ever built, which is a global internet populated by people who remember what confirms their existing sense of the world. The Simpsons did not predict the future. The Simpsons wrote enough possible futures that some of them were guaranteed to arrive, and the ones that arrived are the only ones anyone remembers. But try telling that to yourself the next time a Simpsons clip from 1,998 lines up perfectly with a headline from 2025. Because even knowing how the mechanism works, even understanding the statistics, the confirmation bias, the cultural influence loop, it is still something to witness. 800 episodes. 36 years, thousands of observations, and enough apparent bullseyes to make even the show's own creators occasionally pause and wonder if there is something in the room that none of them can quite identify. Section 9. Where is Springfield? The geography of deliberate impossibility. Springfield is the most famous fictional town in American history. More people can identify Springfield than can name the capital cities of half the states in the actual country. It has a nuclear power plant, a tire fire that has been burning for decades, a gorge, a harbor, a monorail that did not work, an elementary school, a prison, 2 hospitals, and a quick E-Mart. It has mountains and oceans and deserts and farmland and forests and active volcanoes, all within what appears to be reasonable driving distance of each other. It borders the states of Ohio, Nevada, Maine, and Kentucky, depending on which episode you are watching. It is located on the coast. It is located in the heartland. It is near the Canadian border and also near Mexico. Its weather ranges from blizzards to tropical heat waves within a single season. Springfield does not exist in any state because Springfield exists in all of them simultaneously. And the show has been maintaining this impossibility deliberately, carefully, and with considerable creative investment for its entire run. The contradictions are not accidental. Every time a clue appears that seems to narrow the possibilities, a zip code, a state abbreviation, a reference to a neighboring city, a phone area code. Another clue appears in a different episode that directly contradicts it. In one episode, Springfield is clearly in the north. In another, equally clearly in the south. The state abbreviation NT appears on a license plate at one point, which does not correspond to any real American state. When Homer calls the state capital, the voice on the other end identifies the state as one that begins with a vowel, which eliminates some possibilities while leaving dozens of others open. Matt Groening, the show's creator, admitted in a 2012 interview with Smithsonian Magazine that he named the town after Springfield, Oregon, where he grew up. For approximately 2 days, the mystery appeared to be solved. And then the show continued producing episodes that placed Springfield in geographic contexts that are entirely inconsistent with Oregon, as though Groening's confession had never happened. The writers did not honor the revelation. They kept the mystery alive because the mystery was the point all along. The geographic impossibility is not a continuity error. It is the show's most sustained and sophisticated joke. Springfield has oceanfront property and mountain ranges and desert terrain and active volcanoes all within a short drive of each other. No real American community has that combination of features. Those landscapes are separated by hundreds or thousands of miles in the actual country. The town is a geographical assemblage, stitched together from pieces of every American environment that has ever existed. It has the industrial decay of the Rust Belt and the suburban sprawl of the Sun Belt. It has the small-town insularity of New England and the cultural blankness of the Midwest. It has the coastal geography of California and the prairie geography of Kansas simultaneously. The surface explanation, the intentional design philosophy that Groening and the writers have confirmed, is that Springfield is meant to feel familiar to every viewer, regardless of their actual geographic location. A town that could be anywhere is a town that belongs to everyone. The Simpsons is meant to resonate with the broadest possible American audience, and setting it in a place that might plausibly be your town is a significant part of how that resonance gets built. But under the lens of the theories we have been building throughout this conversation, Springfield's geographic impossibility takes on dimensions that the official explanation does not address. If the radiation theory is correct, if Burns's power plant has been mutating the biology of Springfield's residents for decades, why should the physical geography of the town be exempt from the same effects? The people of Springfield have 4 fingers and yellow skin and cannot die from injuries that would kill any normal person. Their pets have the same mutations their owners do. Their fish have extra eyes. If radiation can alter biology at the cellular level, is it impossible that sustained nuclear contamination could warp the physical landscape as well? Maybe Springfield has mountains and oceans within the same town because the contamination does not only affect living things. Maybe the space itself has been altered, compressed, rearranged. This sounds extreme. But then again, so does a man who has been alive for 140 years, maintained by weekly radiation treatments in a facility that also happens to be the primary power source for an entire community. If the coma theory is correct, Springfield's geography makes an entirely different kind of sense. Homer's dreaming mind does not have a precise cartographic representation of America stored in its memory. It has fragments, impressions, emotional associations. Mountains from a vacation he took as a child, oceans from a television commercial, desert from a film he watched on a Saturday afternoon, farmland from driving through the Midwest on a long trip with his family. His unconscious brain assembled Springfield from every American landscape he ever encountered, layering them over each other without regard for geographic logic, because dreams do not operate on geographic logic. Dreams operate on emotional logic. And Springfield feels like America because it is made from Homer's memory of America scattered, incomplete, held together by longing rather than by cartography. If the collective denial theory from The Principal and the Pauper is correct, Springfield's refusal to have a fixed location is the ultimate expression of a community that has learned to make itself impossible to hold accountable. You cannot investigate a town you cannot find on a reliable map. You cannot bring federal charges against a nuclear facility if the state it operates in keeps changing. You cannot hold anyone accountable for anything if the regulatory jurisdiction is permanently undefined. Springfield floats between states because floating is safer than landing. Landing means accountability. Landing means someone arrives with a map and a badge and begins asking questions about the three-eyed fish, the cracked cooling towers, the billionaire who remembers events from before the 20th century. Springfield's geographic uncertainty is not a comedy device. It is a legal shield. In the Season 12 episode called Behind the Laughter, a mockumentary format episode about the Simpson family, Springfield's location is finally revealed, or appears to be. In the original broadcast version, the family is identified as being from northern Kentucky. In syndicated reruns, the location was changed to a different state. The answer literally depends on which version of the episode you are watching. Even when Springfield has a definitive answer, that answer is not permanent. It shifts. It refuses to stay fixed. Every state in America has been theorized as Springfield's home at some point. Every theory has evidence supporting it from some episode and evidence contradicting it from another. The show has been maintaining this state of permanent geographic ambiguity for longer than most of its viewers have been alive. Springfield will never be definitively located, not because the writers cannot decide, but because they decided long ago that Springfield is more valuable as a mystery than as an answer. A town that could be anywhere is a town that cannot be shut down by identifying it in a specific place. And a town that belongs to everyone is a town that cannot be abandoned by anyone. The show made Springfield impossible to find because finding it would mean fixing it, and fixing it would mean changing it. And changing it would mean letting go of the version of America it represents, the version that could be your town, or your street, or your family, or your employer, or the factory you can see from your bedroom window that everyone in the neighborhood has learned to stop discussing. Springfield is everywhere. That is the answer. And everywhere is, famously, impossible to hold responsible for anything. Section 10. The floating timeline: why nobody in Springfield ages, and what that costs. Bart Simpson was 10 years old when The Simpsons debuted in December of 1989. He is 10 years old right now, in 2025. Lisa was 8 then and is 8 now. Homer and Marge were roughly in their mid-30s. They still are. Maggie was 1. She still is. 36 years have passed in the world outside the television. 0 years have passed in Springfield. The industry term for this is a floating timeline. It means the show's present is always the viewer's present. When an episode airs in 2025, the characters are living in 2025. When it aired in 1995, they were living in 1995. The calendar year changes, the technology changes, the cultural references change, but the characters remain fixed at the ages they were when the show began. They exist in a state of temporal suspension in which everything around them evolves and they do not. It is the standard approach for long-running animated shows. Most audiences accept it without sustained attention because it is conventional and because the alternative characters aging in real time would have ended the show after roughly a decade. But The Simpsons has been running long enough that the floating timeline has generated contradictions so dramatic and so structurally significant that they have started to crack the foundation of the show's reality. The most obvious problem is Homer and Marge's backstory. When the show began, their history was grounded in the late 1970s and early 1980s. They met in high school. They fell in love. They had Bart. Their courtship was set during a specific era, complete with era-appropriate music, fashion, and cultural context. Homer's youthful hair, Marge's prom dress, the whole origin was anchored to a time period that made logical sense for parents in their mid-30s during the late 1980s. But as the floating timeline dragged the present forward, the backstory had to move with it. If Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s in 2025, they did not meet in 1980. They met somewhere around 2005, which means their high school experience was defined by MySpace and early YouTube rather than by Watergate and disco. The show has depicted this shift explicitly. In flashback episodes produced across different decades, Homer and Marge's youth has been rewritten to include references to the 1990s, then the 2000s, then the 2010s. Their origin story has been told and retold at least 4 distinct times, each version placing their formative years in a different decade. The characters are the same. The love story has the same shape, but the era keeps sliding forward because the timeline demands it. This means Homer and Marge do not have a fixed past. Their history is revised every few years to maintain the illusion of a perpetual present. Their memories are unstable. Their origin is a draft document that keeps getting updated. And the show treats this as normal because within the operational logic of a floating timeline, it is normal. Characters do not have fixed histories. They have whatever history is needed to make the current episode work. When the next episode needs a different history, the previous version is quietly set aside. Now apply every theory we have covered. The coma theory. Nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen consciousness of a man who went unconscious in April of 1993. Of course, his children do not age. His brain cannot imagine them growing older because he was not there to observe it. His wife does not change because the last image his conscious mind recorded is the one his dream preserves. The floating timeline is not a writing convention in this reading. It is the literal structural property of a mind in stasis. The radiation theory? Nobody ages because their biology has been mutated by decades of nuclear contamination. The cellular mechanisms that govern aging in normal human biology have been altered by chronic radiation exposure, producing a population that does not develop and does not decay in the ways that uncontaminated populations do. The floating timeline is a symptom of biological damage. The principle and the pauper theory. Nobody ages because Springfield collectively agrees not to acknowledge the passage of time. The same social contract that allows the town to maintain convenient lies about its principle allows it to maintain convenient lies about its inhabitants' ages. The floating timeline is a choice, the ongoing product of a community that has decided what it needs to be true and systematically ignores any evidence to the contrary. The Burns immortality theory. At least one person in Springfield has already demonstrated that aging is negotiable within this universe. If Burns can maintain biological function for over a century through the application of sufficient resources and medical intervention, then the concept of aging in Springfield is not a fixed physical law. It is a condition that can be managed, negotiated, or simply refused by those with the means to do so. All of these theories are saying the same thing in different languages. Time does not work in Springfield. Something the radiation, the coma, the collective denial, the billionaire's medical infrastructure, or some combination of all of them has broken the normal flow of time for every person who lives there. The floating timeline is not a production convenience dressed up as a narrative feature. It is evidence. It is the show's most persistent, most structurally fundamental indicator that something fundamental has gone wrong in this town. The show has imagined its characters aging. It has done this several times, with real care and emotional investment. In the Season 6 episode Lisa's Wedding, the show flashes forward to show Lisa as a 23-year-old woman, engaged to be married. The future depicted is detailed and emotionally specific. Lisa has grown into exactly the person the show has always suggested she would become. Principled, searching, brilliant, and profoundly lonely. The episode is genuinely moving. It proves that The Simpsons can imagine its characters as adults. It can envision their futures. It can tell stories about who they would become if time were allowed to proceed normally, but it chooses not to. The flash forward is a single episode, a glimpse through a window that immediately closes. Lisa returns to being 8 years old. Bart returns to being 10. The future is locked away and the perpetual present resumes as though the glimpse never happened. The show can imagine growth. It has decided not to allow it. This is where the mystery becomes something larger than the show itself. Because the floating timeline is not just a narrative device. It is a statement about something outside the show, about what The Simpsons represents in American culture and what Americans need it to represent. The Simpsons is the American family. They have been the American family for longer than any other fictional household in the history of the medium. And the American family, as The Simpsons portrays it, cannot be allowed to change. Homer must always be middle-aged and stumbling through life. Marge must always be patient and holding everything together. Bart must always be rebellious and fundamentally good-hearted. Lisa must always be brilliant and fighting a system that will not make room for her. Maggie must always be watching. The dynamic must be preserved. The structure must hold. Because the moment the Simpson family ages, the moment Bart leaves for college, and Lisa moves away, and Maggie begins to speak, and Homer retires from the power plant, and Marge is left in a quieter house on Evergreen Terrace, the show is not a comedy anymore. It becomes an elegy. The story of a family that ran out of time. And America does not want that story. America wants the version where the children are always young, and the parents are always together, and the house always looks the same, and nobody ever has to say goodbye. The floating timeline is the show's implicit thesis statement. The Simpsons are frozen because we need them to be, because they represent something we cannot afford to let go of. The messy, chaotic, loving, infuriating, functionally indestructible American family. The family that survives everything, resets after every disaster, and starts fresh every Sunday night. The Simpsons do not age because aging means ending, and we will not allow them to end. The loop is not their prison. It is ours. We built it. We tune in every week to confirm that the walls are still standing, and the family is still intact, and the timeline is still floating. And every time we watch, every time we quote a line from an episode that aired before half the current audience was born, we reinforce the loop a little more. We make it harder for the Simpsons to escape. Because if they escape, if the timeline stops floating and starts landing, if Bart turns 11, and Lisa turns 9, and Maggie says her second word, and Homer finally retires, and Marge has the house to herself for the first time in 40 years, then the show ends. And the show ending means acknowledging that the version of America it represents, the chaotic, resilient, perpetually optimistic middle-class American family, was always temporary, was always fragile, was always one birthday closer to dissolving into something unrecognizable. The Simpsons are trapped in a loop because we trapped them there. We pressed pause in 1989 and we never pressed play. And here we are, 36 years later, watching the same family in the same house, on the same impossible street, waiting for something to change, knowing it will not because we will not allow it. Section 11. Hans Moleman, Ned Flanders, and the hidden costs of Springfield. These two characters, one of them barely noticed, one of them beloved, carry between them some of the darkest subtextual weight in the entire series. And they both deserve the kind of attention the show has never quite given them. Start with Hans Moleman. If you have watched The Simpsons for any significant amount of time, you know him. The tiny, elderly, nearly blind man who appears in the background of Springfield scenes and exists primarily to suffer. He gets hit by cars, he gets crushed by falling objects, he gets buried alive, he gets eaten by animals, he gets struck by lightning, he gets incinerated. He walks into traffic and disappears beneath wheels. He is, by any reasonable measure, the most frequently killed character in the history of American animation. The show has killed Hans Moleman dozens of times, not in Treehouse of Horror episodes, where death is expected and death is the joke, not in dream sequences or fantasy cutaways, in regular canonical episodes of the show. And then he appears in the next episode, completely fine, no explanation, no resurrection scene, no acknowledgement that he was dead 2 episodes ago. He simply shows up, ready to be killed again, in a cycle that the show treats as background noise. Most fans accept this as a running gag. Moleman dies frequently. It is a feature. Do not examine it too closely. But the examination is worth doing. If the radiation theory is correct, Moleman could represent the most extreme mutation Springfield has produced. A man whose biology has been so fundamentally altered by nuclear exposure that his body can reconstitute itself after fatal trauma. He does not survive his deaths the way Homer survives injuries. Homer endures damage and heals. Moleman actually dies. His body ceases to function. And then he comes back, as though death in Springfield operates differently for certain residents. As though the contamination that has altered everything else about the town's inhabitants has, in Moleman's case, altered even the finality of death. If the coma theory is correct, Moleman serves a different function. He is a background process in Homer's dream, a filler character that Homer's unconscious mind does not invest enough attention in to maintain consistently. Moleman dies because Homer's dreaming brain occasionally lets minor characters lapse. He comes back because the dream requires him to populate the next scene. He is not a person in this reading. He is furniture that Homer's mind occasionally breaks and then reassembles, because Springfield needs a certain number of bodies to feel lived in. If the collective denial theory applies, Moleman's deaths are simply another thing Springfield has agreed not to notice. A man dies in public, visibly, repeatedly, in front of witnesses, and nobody investigates. Nobody calls for an ambulance. Nobody asks how he keeps returning. The town has normalized Moleman's death cycle the same way it normalized everything else that should be alarming. The three-eyed fish, the glowing billionaire, the baby who shot a man, the principal who is not who he says he is, a tiny old man who dies every few weeks and keeps showing up. Here is the detail that changes how you see him. Moleman once stated his age as 31 years old. 31. Look at him. He appears to be in his 80s or 90s at minimum. He has the posture and fragility of extreme old age. He can barely see. He moves with the careful deliberateness of someone who has been managing a body in serious decline for decades. If he is 31, something aged him catastrophically. Something took a young man and transformed him into the physical embodiment of ancient frailty in what should have been the prime of his life. The same something that also made him nearly indestructible despite his apparent physical deterioration, something that turned death from a permanent condition into a revolving door. The radiation theory has an answer for this. The coma theory has an answer. The collective denial theory has an answer. The only framework that does not have an answer is the one that says, The Simpsons is just a cartoon, and none of this means anything. And we have been sitting with the show long enough tonight to know that that framework is doing a lot of work it cannot quite support. Now let's talk about Ned Flanders. Because Ned is the character the show has quietly, methodically, and devastatingly destroyed more thoroughly than any other, and the darkness hiding beneath his relentless cheerfulness is one of the most genuinely unsettling subtexts in the entire series. On the surface, Ned Flanders is everything Homer Simpson is not. He is kind and generous and devoutly religious. He is physically fit. He is financially responsible. He is a good father to Rod and Todd. He is a good neighbor consistently, without complaint, across decades of being taken advantage of by the person living directly next door. He is, by any reasonable objective measure, a better person than Homer in virtually every conceivable category. He does everything right. He follows the rules. He honors his commitments. He gives more than he takes, and the show punishes him for it, relentlessly, methodically, without mercy. Ned's wife Maude was killed in a freak accident at the Springfield Speedway when a t-shirt cannon misfired and the shirts hit Maude instead of Homer, who was dodging them. Homer's reflexive self-preservation killed Ned's wife, and Ned forgave him. Because that is what Ned does. He forgives, he turns the other cheek. He absorbs punishment after punishment and responds with grace and patience and an unwavering faith that God has a plan that encompasses even the most senseless, preventable losses. But there was an episode where the facade cracked. After a hurricane destroys Ned's house and the community rebuilds it so poorly that it collapses almost immediately, Ned has a complete psychological breakdown. He screams at the town. He insults every person who has ever wronged him. He says things he has been suppressing for decades, grievances and rages and resentments that he has been burying under layers of Christian charity for as long as anyone can remember, and then he is institutionalized, committed to a mental health facility. Because in Springfield, a man having a visible breakdown is a problem to be managed, not a signal to be understood. Inside the facility, the truth about Ned emerges. His relentless niceness is not natural. It is not a character trait. It is the result of childhood behavioral modification. Ned was a violent, uncontrollable child. His parents, being beatniks who did not believe in discipline, took him to a psychiatrist who spent years conditioning the aggression out of him through systematic behavioral reprogramming. The therapy was so thorough, so deeply embedded in Ned's psychology, that it effectively rewired him. His capacity to express anger was not simply reduced, it was eliminated at the architectural level. Ned cannot get angry, not because he never feels it, because his brain was conditioned, when he was young enough to be permanently shaped by the conditioning, to suppress it at all costs. Ned's kindness is not a virtue. It is a cage. Everything about him reads differently once you understand this. His patience with Homer is not saintly. It is pathological, the programmed response of a man whose brain will not permit the expression of the emotions that Homer consistently provokes. His faith is not spiritual conviction in the usual sense. It is a coping mechanism, an external framework that a man with systematically suppressed emotion uses to explain why he keeps suffering despite doing everything right. His forgiveness of Homer for Maude's death is not grace. It is the only behavioral option available to a man who is conditioned as a child to never, under any circumstances, access the rage that lives inside him. And the show knows this. It showed us what happens when the conditioning fails. When Ned breaks down, the person underneath is not monstrous. He does not become violent, though the implication that the capacity is there lurks at the edges. What emerges is something quieter and more terrible. a despair without a floor. The grief of a man who has spent his entire life performing goodness for an audience that does not notice, following rules in a system that does not reward rule following, offering grace to people who never think to extend it back. The darkest theory about Ned Flanders is the simplest one. He is the saddest character in the show, sadder than Homer, who is too cognitively damaged to fully comprehend the dimensions of his own suffering. Sadder than Lisa, who is young enough to still believe things might improve if she tries hard enough. Sadder than Burns, who is too insulated by wealth to encounter consequences. Ned Flanders, who does everything right, follows every guideline, honors every commitment, and receives nothing in return that was worth having. His wife is gone, his house has been destroyed, his neighbor will never appreciate him, and the God he has devoted his life to worshiping, the God who, within the show's own continuity, exists and has had face-to-face conversations with Homer Simpson on multiple occasions, has never once spoken directly to Ned. God talks to Homer. God ignores Ned. The man who falls asleep in church gets divine attention and guidance. The man who has structured his entire existence around faith gets silence. That asymmetry is not accidental. It is a deliberate creative choice. The Simpsons is telling you something with it. Goodness is not rewarded in Springfield. Kindness is not protected. Faith is not answered. The system, whatever combination of radiation, institutional corruption, collective denial, and accumulated consequence we want to call the system, does not care about moral behavior. It cares about compliance, and Ned is the most thoroughly compliant man in town. He was programmed to be compliant before he was old enough to choose otherwise. His reward is a dead wife, a destroyed house, a neighbor who takes and takes and takes, and a God who reserves his conversational warmth for a man who does not go to church reliably. Homer Simpson does everything wrong in a system that does not punish wrongness. Ned Flanders does everything right in a system that does not reward rightness. They live next door to each other. They have lived next door to each other for 36 years. And the gap between them, the gap between the man who tries and the man who does not, has never once closed. Because the system is not designed to close it. The system is designed to keep Homer at the plant, and Ned at the church, and Burns at the top, and Molman in the ground, and everyone exactly where they are, forever, in a loop that will not break unless something from outside the loop intervenes. And so far, nothing has. Section 12. The theory behind all the theories, why we built Springfield, and why we can't leave it. We have spent a long time in Springfield tonight. We have examined the radiation poisoning every resident, embedded in the cracked cooling towers and the violated water supply, and the 342 ways that Burns's facility has been slowly altering the biology of an entire town. We have explored the possibility that Homer has been unconscious since April of 1993, and that every episode since that date is a love letter from a dying father to the family he cannot reach. We have reopened the Burns shooting case and found enough contradictions to make the official verdict feel less like a solution and more like a decision. We have traced Burns's impossible lifespan through weekly radiation treatments and disease equilibrium, and the infrastructure of extreme wealth applied to the single objective of biological persistence. We have followed Mona Simpson's story from housewife to radical to fugitive, and traced the wreckage her forced disappearance left across 3 generations of a family that never fully understood what had been done to them. We have looked behind Maggie's silence and found something extraordinary there. Intelligence that cannot be adequately measured, strategy that cannot be dismissed, and patience that looks like infancy from the outside while being something much more considered from within. We have watched a town vote to criminalize truth, have a war hero tied to a railroad car and expelled from his own life, and have made it illegal to mention that it happened. We have counted the predictions that came true, examined the mechanism that generates them, and understood why even a rational explanation for the phenomenon cannot entirely deflate the uncanny feeling it produces. We have searched for Springfield on a map and found it simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. We have stared at the floating timeline long enough to understand that it is not a cartoon convention, it is a reflection of what we need the show to be. Every theory we explored arrived at the same destination through a different path. Something is wrong in Springfield. Something structural. Something that runs beneath the jokes and the couch gags and the 36 seasons of accumulated storytelling. Whether the mechanism is radiation or a coma or collective denial, or the systematic corruption of every institution in the town, or the sheer gravitational weight of existing for 36 years without being permitted to change, something has broken the rules of ordinary reality in this place. And the show has been telling us about it since the very first episode. Not through exposition, not through dramatic reveals or formal announcements. Through accumulation, through the patient, methodical layering of detail upon detail upon detail across hundreds of episodes and decades of cultural presence, The Simpsons is not hiding its mysteries. It is showing them to you every single week. And the reason nobody in Springfield can see them is the same reason it took us this long to see them ourselves. We became Springfield. We watched for so many years, absorbed so many episodes, normalized so many impossible things that we stopped noticing how impossible they were. The yellow skin, the four fingers, the ageless children, the billionaire who cannot die, the town that cannot be located, the family that survives everything and changes nothing and resets every 7 days as reliably as the calendar. We normalized all of it. We became the people who look at a three-eyed fish and say, well, that is just how things are around here. But that is not the only thing the show is doing. Underneath the mysteries, underneath the theories, underneath the evidence and the contradictions and the alternate endings, and the fan theories the writers have had to publicly address, there is something else. Something quieter. Something that is not really a mystery at all, even though it feels like one. The theories exist because some people looked at Springfield and refused to accept it at face value. They dug. They connected. They asked the questions that the characters cannot ask because the characters are trapped inside the loop. And what those people found, what we have been exploring for several hours now, is a version of Springfield that is stranger and sadder and more beautiful than the one the show presents overtly. A version where Homer's limitations are a scar left by a system that deliberately broke his family before he was old enough to understand what was happening to him. Where Maggie's silence is the most strategically intelligent decision anyone in the family has ever made. Where Burns's immortality is the inevitable conclusion of unchecked wealth applied to its most fundamental objective, the preservation of itself. Where Marge's endless patience is not passive or resigned, but is the structural foundation that holds an entire household together against forces that should have collapsed it decades ago. Where Bart's rebellion is the only sane response to a world that has been designed to keep him small. Where Lisa, 8 years old and brilliant and profoundly alone, keeps asking the questions nobody wants to answer because she is the only person in Springfield who has not stopped looking. And where Maggie waits, still watching, still listening, still planning something that none of us can fully see yet. That is The Simpsons. 36 seasons, 788 episodes, the longest-running animated series in American history. The most analyzed, most theorized, most deeply dissected piece of television ever created. And after all of that analysis, after all of those theories, after all the evidence and all the hours spent trying to crack the code of what this show is actually doing, the biggest mystery is still the simplest one. Why can't we let them go? Maybe because they are us. Maybe because Springfield is the town we grew up in some version of it. Maybe because Homer is the father we knew, or the father we were afraid we would become. Maybe because Marge is the patience we relied on and never adequately recognized. Maybe because Bart is who we secretly wanted to be, and Lisa is who we privately knew we should have tried harder to be. And Maggie is the version of ourselves we keep hidden. The part that watches everything and says nothing and waits for the right moment to finally act? Or maybe it is simpler than all of that. Maybe we cannot let them go because letting them go means acknowledging that 36 years have passed, that we are older now, that the world we grew up in is genuinely, irreversibly different from the one we inhabit, that the couch we sat on as children while watching the opening credits has been replaced by a different couch, or sold, or is in a house that belongs to someone else now. As long as The Simpsons is on, as long as the loop keeps floating, as long as Bart is 10 and Lisa is 8, and Homer is coming through the door at 5:30, after another day at the plant, we do not have to acknowledge any of that. We can sit down, we can turn on the television, and we can go home. Home to Evergreen Terrace, home to Springfield. Home to the family that never changes, in the town that never ages, in the show that never ends. Because here is the thing about the floating timeline and the coma theory and the radiation theory and all the rest of them. Every one of those theories, no matter how dark its implications, no matter how disturbing the mechanism it proposes, arrives at the same conclusion. Homer finds his way home, every episode, through every impossible thing that happens, through every catastrophe and reset and impossible survival and collective forgetting. Homer comes home. The credits roll and the family is intact and the house is still standing. And in that fidelity, in that single narrative commitment that the show has honored for 36 years without exception, there is something that is not a theory and is not a mystery. It is just true. Homer loves his family. That love is the one thing the show has never contradicted, never complicated, never reset. Whatever else Springfield is: contamination zone, coma dream, collective delusion, closed system of unbreakable power, it is also the place where a man comes home to his family every single night. And every single night, no matter what the day held, that is enough. Maybe that is what we have been watching all along. Not a mystery, not a tragedy. Not a horror story dressed up in bright colors. A love story, the most ordinary and most radical kind. A man who cannot do most things right, in a town that was never designed to treat him well, finding his way back to the people he loves every single time. The loop does not trap Homer. For Homer, the loop is the point. And maybe if we are honest about why we keep watching, about why we have kept watching for 36 years, about why the show that should have ended decades ago is still on our screens every week, maybe for us, the loop is the point too. We do not watch The Simpsons to find out what happens next. We watch it to go home. Thank you for spending 4 hours in Springfield with me. If this is the kind of deep dive you are here for, subscribe. There are more of these waiting. Drop a comment with where you are watching from and what time it is. And if you fell asleep somewhere around Burns's immortality theory, I genuinely respect that. Springfield will be here when you wake up. It always is. Extended section. The Treehouse of Horror Dimension. What the horror episodes reveal about the show's real fears. There is one more thread worth pulling, and it connects to something we have been circling without naming directly all night. The Treehouse of Horror episodes. The annual Halloween specials that have run for 34 years and counting, one per season, containing 3 self-contained horror stories per episode. They are typically classified as non-canonical. They do not count, the deaths are not real, the events have no bearing on the main timeline. Watch them as jokes. Enjoy the horror tropes and the famous monster riffs and move on. But the Treehouse of Horror episodes are not simply parody. They are something more structurally interesting than parody. They are the show's permission structure, the designated space where The Simpsons is allowed to say directly what the regular episodes can only say sideways. In the regular canon, Homer's indestructibility is a running joke. In Treehouse of Horror, Homer literally cannot die. The joke becomes explicit. He is shot, he is stabbed, his head is cut off and still moving, and in every case he simply continues. What the regular episodes show you through accumulation and implication, the horror specials state as plain fact. Homer Simpson is, in some operational sense, unkillable. The radiation theory reads this as biological adaptation. The coma theory reads it as the dream's refusal to let its dreamer die. The Treehouse of Horror episodes give the regular show permission to make the subtext visible. The horror specials also return, with notable consistency, to specific themes: the corruption of authority, the invasion of privacy, the dangers of unchecked technology, the ways in which communities sacrifice individuals for collective stability. The horror of realizing that the people responsible for your safety are either incompetent or deliberately indifferent. These are the same themes that run through every theory we have examined tonight. In one Treehouse episode, Homer sells his soul to the devil for a donut and spends the rest of the story trying to navigate a legal system that was designed by and for the powerful. In another, a segment called Time and Punishment shows Homer discovering that every intervention he makes in the past has catastrophic unintended consequences. A direct confrontation with the show's floating timeline logic, dramatized as horror. In another, the entire town is taken over by advertising mascots who enslave the population, and the only way to defeat them is to ignore them. A story about what happens when the things designed to capture your attention actually succeed. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are where The Simpsons thinks out loud. Where the horror of Springfield, the horror we have been unpacking for hours, gets to wear its face without the comedy's protective layer around it. They are a pressure valve, a release mechanism that allows the show to keep functioning in its regular format without the weight of its own implications collapsing it. But they are also evidence. Because the things the show chooses to make horror, the things it reaches for when it wants to genuinely disturb its audience, are not random. They are the specific anxieties that the regular show has been processing in a more mediated form for 36 years. Loss of agency, loss of memory, the realization that the person in charge does not care whether you live or die, the discovery that the system you trusted was built to benefit someone else. The experience of being trapped in a loop you cannot escape and cannot understand. That is what the horror specials are afraid of. And it is exactly what Springfield is. Extended section. Bart and Lisa, the children the show uses as mirrors. We have spent considerable time on Homer, on Marge, on Maggie, on Burns, on the structural forces that shape and maintain Springfield as the impossible place it is. But Bart and Lisa carry their own distinct threads of meaning, and those threads connect to everything we have been discussing in ways the show almost never addresses directly. Bart Simpson, at first encounter, is a simple archetype, the rebellious underachiever, the bad kid with a good heart, the boy who acts out because acting out is the only form of agency available to someone his age in a world that consistently overlooks him. His pranks are famous, his catchphrases are famous, his skateboard is famous. He is one of the most recognizable characters in the history of animation. But Bart's rebellion, when you place it inside the Springfield we have been describing tonight, changes character. Bart lives in a town where the water is contaminated, where the medical establishment is compromised, where the educational system is chronically underfunded, because the man who stole the oil money from beneath the school cannot be held accountable. He attends an elementary school run, at the administrative level, by a man living under a stolen identity. His teacher is a bitter, chronically disappointed woman named Mrs. Crabapple, who reached her career ceiling decades ago and has been processing that loss through daily interactions with the children in her classroom. His principal answers to a school board that answers to a town government that answers to Burns. Bart is not a bad student because he is lazy or stupid. Bart is a child in a system that was not designed for him, surrounded by adults who are either too damaged to help him or too constrained by the system to try. His resistance to authority is not a character flaw. It is a reasonable response to authority that has demonstrably not earned the compliance it demands. The coma theory adds a layer to this. If Homer is dreaming, then Bart is Homer's dream of his own son, the version of himself that Homer wished he could have been. Defiant, irreverent, unafraid of consequences, capable of joy without the weight of self-awareness. Bart does the things Homer would have done if Homer had not been broken. He pulls pranks without consequence, challenges authority without being destroyed by it, makes friends easily and maintains them effortlessly. He is the version of childhood that Homer's dreaming mind constructs, because it is the childhood Homer never had, the one that was foreclosed by a mother who disappeared and a father who coped by closing down. Lisa is the most complex character in the show, and the show's treatment of her is, over time, one of its most quietly devastating sustained arguments. Lisa is brilliant. Genuinely, measurably brilliant, a level of intelligence in her household and in her community that has no peer. She is principled. She is driven. She cares about the world with a sincerity that the show never mocks, even when the world she is trying to improve consistently resists her. She plays the saxophone with genuine talent. She reads constantly. She argues for what she believes and keeps arguing even when arguing costs her, and she receives in return essentially nothing that was worth the cost. She is isolated by her intelligence in a school that cannot serve her. She is dismissed by adults who find her intensity inconvenient. She is loved by her family in a general way that frequently fails to translate into the specific understanding she needs. She is the most gifted member of a household that rarely notices, in a community that does not value what she offers, fighting every day for a recognition that Springfield simply does not have the capacity to provide. The flash forward in Lisa's wedding shows us the adult Lisa becomes if she is allowed to grow. She is accomplished, principled, engaged, and profoundly lonely. The intelligence that set her apart in childhood has followed her into adulthood and continued to set her apart. She is going to marry a man who understands her, and the episode's emotional core is Lisa's quiet grief over what she cannot bring home with her. the family she loves, unchanged, unable to fully meet her where she is. That episode is the show telling you what it believes about exceptional children in environments that cannot nurture them. They grow up, they leave, they find a life that fits them, and they carry, for as long as they live, the particular ache of loving people who could not quite see them. Lisa keeps asking questions. She always has. Even after every adult in Springfield has demonstrated, repeatedly and conclusively, that they do not want the questions asked, Lisa keeps asking them. Because that is what Lisa is. The person who has not stopped looking, even when looking is painful, even when the answers are worse than the questions. She is the show's conscience. And the show has spent 36 years watching what happens to consciences in systems that prefer compliance. It is not good. But Lisa does not stop. She never stops. Extended section, Springfield's economy and the hidden dependency. There is one final structural dimension to Springfield that deserves attention, because it connects every individual theory we have explored into a single, coherent picture. Springfield's economy is, at its foundation, a Burns economy. The nuclear power plant is the primary employer in the town. It is the primary source of energy. It is the largest corporate entity operating within Springfield's boundaries. And Burns is its sole owner and controller. Every paycheck drawn by a plant employee, and there are many, originates with Burns. Every kilowatt of electricity consumed by Springfield's residents and businesses is purchased from Burns's facility. The economic structure of the town is not a network. It is a wheel, and Burns is the hub. This means that every attempt to challenge Burns, every instinct toward accountability, every impulse to question the safety violations, every moment where a resident might be moved to organize, or resist, or simply speak up, runs immediately into the economic reality that Burns controls the conditions of their lives. The doctor who notices something troubling in her patient's blood work and traces it to the water supply is also a Springfield resident who needs electricity. The politician who wants to run on an environmental platform is campaigning in a town where the primary employer is the source of the environmental problem. The safety inspector who would shut the plant down is the man who receives his paycheck from the plant. The contamination is not just physical, it is economic, it is structural. Springfield cannot bite the hand that feeds it, because the hand that feeds it is attached to the arm that also holds it in place. This is why the radiation theory and the conspiracy theory and the collective denial theory are all, finally, describing the same thing from different angles. The radiation explains the biological mechanism. The conspiracy explains the deliberate choices made to maintain the system. The collective denial explains the psychological adaptation that allows people to live inside an impossible situation without breaking down. But the economic dependency is what makes all of the others possible. Without the economic structure, without the fact that every person in Springfield is, in some meaningful way, financially dependent on the continuation of the very thing that is harming them, the other mechanisms would not be sufficient to maintain the loop. Burns understood this when he built the plant. He may have understood it even before that. The power plant is not just a source of energy and a source of contamination. It is a source of control. Control over the employment, the energy, the economy, and through those things, the behavior and the loyalty and the cognitive freedom of everyone who lives within its orbit. And Springfield lives entirely within its orbit. That is the final theory. And it is not really a theory at all. It is a description of something the show has been depicting accurately and consistently for 36 years. A town that is owned by the thing that is harming it. A population that knows, somewhere, that something is wrong, but cannot afford economically, psychologically, or cognitively to face what that wrongness actually is. Springfield is a town held in place by its own dependency. And the loop runs because the people inside it cannot stop it without dismantling the structure that keeps them fed, lit, warm, and employed, which means the loop runs. It runs, and it has run, and it will keep running. Every morning, Homer gets up. He drives to work. He sits down at his console in Sector 7G and opens a donut. The cooling towers hum outside the window. The reactor generates its power. The lights in Springfield come on. The water flows through pipes that have been corroded by decades of neglect. The fish in the river open their 3 eyes to the morning light. And Burns, in his office high above it all, watches through his narrow window, sustained by his weekly treatment, surrounded by the infrastructure of his own survival, presiding over a system that he built and that he maintains and that he intends to maintain until the end of whatever approximates time in this town, which, as we have established, may be forever. That is Springfield. That is the show. That is what we tune into every week because something in us recognizes it. Something in us knows this town. Not because we have been there, but because some version of it is closer to home than we usually allow ourselves to think. The Simpsons runs because we need it to run, because the loop needs to keep going, because Homer needs to keep coming home, and so do we. Good night. Sleep well. Springfield will be here when you wake up. It always is. End of script. Total approximate word count, 46,000 plus. Expansion. The deeper radiation theory. Cognitive geography. Let's return to the radiation theory one more time, because there are aspects of it that the initial pass left unexplored. Specifically, the question of cognition, not just Homer's, not just the crayon-specific impairment we discussed, but the broader cognitive picture of Springfield as a whole. Springfield is a town where people do not learn from experience. This is sometimes framed as a cartoon convention. Episodic television requires that the characters reset between episodes, that consequences don't accumulate, that Homer can be taught a lesson in the final act and then return to his baseline by the next week. But The Simpsons has always been unusually self-aware about this reset, frequently drawing attention to its own use of it, which means the reset isn't just a production convenience. It's something the show has chosen to comment on, and the radiation theory offers an explanation for it that is genuinely disturbing. The population of Springfield has been so chronically exposed to low-level contamination that their long-term memory consolidation is compromised. They can experience things. They can feel things. They can even change within the duration of a single episode. But the learning doesn't stick. The new understanding dissolves. By the next morning, they're back where they started. This is, in the medical literature on radiation effects, a recognized pattern. The hippocampus, the brain structure most directly involved in converting short-term experience into long-term memory, is particularly sensitive to radiation damage. Communities near certain nuclear facilities have been studied for exactly this kind of cognitive effect, and while the research is contested and the doses involved are typically much higher than background radiation, the mechanism is real. Springfield's population remembers each day but cannot accumulate those days into a coherent narrative of change. They are, cognitively, trapped in a kind of extended present tense, always here, always now, always experiencing the same immediate reality without the deeper temporal perspective that memory provides. Which is, if you think about it, a perfect description of what the floating timeline does narratively. The show's structure mirrors, at the level of its characters, what the radiation is doing to them biologically. Springfield can't accumulate change because its people can't accumulate memory. And its people can't accumulate memory because the water they've been drinking since birth has been doing something to the part of their brains responsible for the conversion. Burns knows this. The show hints at it across multiple episodes. Burns is, in various ways, depicted as the only person in Springfield with genuine historical perspective, the only one who remembers the full arc of events, who can trace causes back to origins, who holds the town's true history in his head while everyone around him has lost it to the contamination. He is both the cause of the amnesia and its only custodian. He is the only one who knows what Springfield has forgotten, and he has every incentive to keep it that way. Expansion. The Homer-Burns relationship, a fuller picture. The relationship between Homer Simpson and Montgomery Burns is the show's central relationship in ways that don't always get acknowledged. Homer and Marge are the emotional center of the show. Homer and Bart are the comedic engine. But Homer and Burns are the show's structural spine, the axis around which all of Springfield's power and vulnerability rotate. Consider the basic dynamic. Burns is the most powerful person in Springfield. Homer is, by almost any measure, one of the least powerful. Burns is extraordinarily old, extraordinarily wealthy, and extraordinarily intelligent. Homer is middle-aged, financially precarious, and cognitively impaired. Burns has complete institutional control over Homer's livelihood. Homer has, as his primary leverage, the fact that he is surprisingly difficult to fire, either due to incompetence in the HR department or due to the deal Grandpa made, depending on which episode you're referencing. What's strange about this relationship is the moments where it inverts. There are episodes where Burns needs Homer, not as an employee, not as a tool but genuinely needs him, in a way that is more personal and more vulnerable than Burns's usual manner allows. The episode where Burns tries to be Homer's friend and briefly succeeds before his own contemptuous nature reasserts itself. The episode where Burns loses his fortune and has to live with the Simpsons, experiencing ordinary life with a disoriented wonder that is one of the show's funnier comedic reversals. In these moments, Burns becomes something more than a villain. He becomes a figure of genuine pathos, a man who has had so much power for so long that he has lost access to ordinary human things. He cannot have a friendship. He cannot have a genuine peer relationship. He cannot experience the texture of daily life that Homer moves through constantly without noticing how extraordinary it is. Homer has the richer inner life. That's the show's great quiet reversal. The billionaire who controls the town is, at the level of actual lived experience, impoverished in ways that Homer, with his beer and his family and his couch, and his uncomplicated capacity for joy, simply isn't. Burns survives because he has engineered his own survival. Homer thrives, in his limited way, because he doesn't know enough to be afraid of the things he should be afraid of. And between them, they hold Springfield in its impossible equilibrium. The man with all the power and the man with all the experience, neither one capable of seeing what the other has, both of them circling each other in the same town forever. Expansion, the Marge theory, the character who holds the world together. There is a theory about Marge Simpson that doesn't get discussed as often as the theories about Homer or Maggie or Burns, but that is in some ways the most quietly radical of all of them. Marge Simpson is the most competent person in Springfield. Not the most intelligent Lisa has her beat there. Not the most powerful Burns, obviously, but the most genuinely, practically competent. The most capable of navigating the world as it actually is, maintaining functioning relationships with difficult people, solving the immediate problems that the household generates on a nearly daily basis, and doing all of this without the benefit of Burns's wealth, Lisa's intellect, or Maggie's strange gifts. The show has always known this. Marge's competence is a running thread. She builds a pretzel business, she pursues a career in law enforcement, she becomes a legitimate artist, she runs for office. In every context where she is given room to operate without being constrained by Springfield's structures or her own anxiety, she is remarkable. But the theory goes further. The theory argues that Marge is not just competent, she is the structural force that makes Springfield functional. Without Marge, the Simpson household collapses within a week. Without Marge, Homer cannot maintain his job, cannot raise his children, cannot navigate the basic social contracts of adult life. Without Marge, the family flies apart. And if the Homer's coma theory is true, if the entire show is Homer's dream, then Marge's centrality in the dream takes on a specific meaning. Homer's unconscious constructs Springfield as a place where Marge is always present, always managing, always holding things together. Because the deepest fear underneath the coma dream isn't the disasters. It's the loss of Marge. The possibility that she waited at his bedside for a while and then, at some point, stopped. Every episode where Homer almost loses Marge, and there are many, is the coma's nightmare scenario surfacing through the dream. Every episode where they reconcile, where she takes him back, where the marriage reasserts itself against the centrifugal forces trying to pull it apart, is Homer's dreaming mind resolving its deepest fear. Marge doesn't stay because the plot requires her to. In the logic of the coma theory, she stays because Homer cannot dream a world where she doesn't. The alternative is too dark to generate as a sustained narrative. So she stays. She always stays. She takes him back, episode after episode, with a patience that exceeds what any real person would maintain, because she's not a real person in this reading. She's what Homer most needs to believe, that she waited, that she's still there, that the house on Evergreen Terrace still has her in it. Expansion. The Bart theory, what rebellion actually costs? Bart Simpson is the show's first face. Before Homer became the center of gravity, before Lisa became the moral voice, before Maggie became the show's most interesting mystery, Bart was the character that defined The Simpsons for its first wave of cultural impact. He was on t-shirts, his phrases entered the language. He was, for a moment in the early 1990s, the most famous cartoon character in the world. And then the show moved on, and Bart became, gradually, more of a supporting character in his own family. Homer took over as the primary comic engine. Lisa became the show's moral protagonist. Bart continued to be central, but his centrality became more about his relationship to Homer than about his own inner life. There's a theory that this shift is itself meaningful, that the show gradually marginalized Bart because Bart represents something the show became less comfortable with as it aged. Bart is a child who refuses to accept the values of the adult world around him. Not because he's evil, not because he's cognitively impaired, not because he's been damaged in the ways the radiation theory suggests Springfield's residents have been. He refuses because the adult world around him, when you look at it clearly, doesn't deserve acceptance. The adults of Springfield are, with a few exceptions, either complicit in its dysfunction or too broken to resist it. The institutions are corrupt. The authority figures are incompetent or self-serving. The social contracts are based on comfortable fictions. Bart sees this. He doesn't have Lisa's language for it. He can't articulate what he sees in political or philosophical terms. But he feels it, and his rebellion is a response to it. Every prank, every defiance of authority, every deliberately terrible academic performance is Bart saying, "This system doesn't deserve my compliance." The problem the show runs into, over its long run, is that this position has costs. Bart's rebellion doesn't produce freedom. It produces stasis. He stays in the fourth grade. He accumulates nothing. He resists everything and builds nothing. And the theory is that this is the show's most honest moment of social commentary delivered inadvertently. In the world of the show, and in the world the show is satirizing, principled refusal doesn't build anything. You can refuse to play along, and the game continues without you. The system doesn't need your compliance. It continues regardless. Bart refuses to be schooled by a broken school. The school continues. Springfield continues. Burns continues. Homer goes to work every morning. Bart is right about everything he refuses, and his refusal changes nothing. That's not a reason to stop refusing, but it is an honest account of what rebellion costs in a system with enough inertia to absorb it. Expansion, Lisa, and isolation, the price of clarity. If Bart's theory is about the cost of refusal, Lisa's theory is about the cost of clarity. Lisa Simpson sees Springfield for what it is. She sees the corruption, the pollution, the intellectual poverty, the social dysfunction. She sees Homer's limitations with love but without illusion. She sees the school system's failures from the inside. She sees the town's collective amnesia and collective denial. She is, in this sense, the most clear-sighted character in the show, the one who is consistently right about what is wrong. And she is alone. Not always, not in every episode. The show gives her friends, mentors, moments of genuine connection. But structurally, narratively, the show keeps returning to Lisa's isolation as her defining condition. Her intelligence is the thing that sets her apart, and being set apart in Springfield is not a gift. It's a sentence. The fan theory that takes this most seriously argues that Lisa is the show's sustained meditation on what it costs to be right in a world that doesn't want to know. Springfield doesn't punish Lisa for being wrong. It doesn't punish her for her politics, her vegetarianism, her saxophone. It simply ignores her. It continues around her. Her clarity doesn't change anything, it just separates her from the comfortable ignorance that everyone else gets to live in. There's a specific kind of grief in that. Not the grief of defeat, but the grief of witness. Lisa has to watch Springfield be Springfield, clearly, day after day, without the protection of the cognitive fog that the radiation theory gives everyone else. She has to see the three-eyed fish and know what it means. She has to understand the power plant and know what it's doing. She has to look at her father and see both the love and the limitation, without being able to unsee either. The coma theory, applied to Lisa, gives this an extra dimension. If the whole show is Homer's dream, then Lisa's intelligence is Homer's dream of a daughter who sees clearly, who has the capacity he lacks, who can understand the world he can't. In the dream, she's isolated because Homer knows, at some level, that clarity in Springfield is isolating. But she's also there, which means he hasn't given up on the idea that someone in the family will eventually understand things well enough to explain them. Lisa is Homer's hope. Dressed in a red dress, playing her saxophone, always slightly too good for the world she was born into. The show's relationship with death. Death in The Simpsons is strange. Characters die. Maude Flanders died. Bleeding Gums Murphy, Lisa's jazz mentor, one of the show's most beautiful early supporting characters, died. Frank Grimes died. Mona Simpson died. Various guest characters have died over the years. Some played for pathos, some for comedy, some for both. But death in Springfield doesn't quite work the way it works elsewhere. The most obvious example is the repeated deaths of Hans Molleman, which we've discussed. But the broader pattern is that death in the show's world is strangely underpowered, strangely unable to accumulate into the weight it would carry in a realistic narrative. When Maud Flanders died, it was a significant emotional event. The show handled her death with genuine gravity, and Ned's grief became one of the show's more sustained explorations of loss. But over time, the world adjusted, and Maud's absence became simply a fact about Ned's background rather than an ongoing wound. When Bleeding Gums Murphy died, the episode was one of the show's most affecting. Lisa's grief, her musical connection to her mentor, the way the show used jazz as a language for things that couldn't be said otherwise. But the next episode, Murphy was gone and the world had moved on. This is episodic television. This is how it works. But The Simpsons has been running long enough and has developed its characters deeply enough that the inability to accumulate grief becomes its own kind of statement. The town cannot mourn. The radiation theory says, the capacity for sustained emotional processing has been impaired along with everything else. The coma theory says, Homer's dreaming mind cannot sustain loss when a character dies in the dream. The dream processes it and moves on because sustaining grief would compromise the dream's function. The collective denial theory says, Springfield collectively agrees not to mourn too long because sustained mourning would require sustained acknowledgement of loss, and sustained acknowledgement of loss would eventually require acknowledging the conditions that cause it. All three explanations converge on the same result. Springfield grieves briefly and then continues. The dead are honored and then, quietly, absorbed back into the town's ongoing present tense, which makes the exceptions stand out all the more sharply. The moments where the grief doesn't quite clear, where a character carries something forward from an episode into the next one, where the loss refuses to be fully processed. Homer and his mother, Ned and Maud, Lisa and her mentors, one after another. Those are the places where the show's managed forgetting fails, where something true breaks through. And those are, maybe not coincidentally, the moments people remember most clearly from the show's long run. The moments that became part of what it means to have watched it. Expansion, the show's self-awareness and what it means. The Simpsons has always been a show with unusual self-awareness. From its earliest seasons, it built meta-commentary into its structure, jokes about being a television show, references to its own production, moments where characters seemed to be aware that they existed within a fictional frame. This self-awareness has deepened over time. By the later seasons, the show's meta-commentary had become a significant part of its identity. Couch gags that comment on animation, episodes that directly address the show's age and declining quality, references to fan theories, acknowledgments of continuity errors. The fan theory question this raises is, what does it mean when a show becomes self-aware about its own mythology? One reading is that it's a defensive gesture, the show preemptively acknowledging its weaknesses before critics can raise them, making the flaws into jokes, protecting itself through irony. If the show makes fun of its own continuity errors, the argument goes, then continuity errors can't be used against it. But there's a more interesting reading. When The Simpsons acknowledges fan theories, when it makes jokes about Homer's coma or Springfield's geography or the floating timeline, it's not just being defensive. It's engaging in a genuine conversation with the people who have spent decades looking at it carefully. The show knows it has been analyzed. It knows the radiation theory, the coma theory, the various shooters of Mr. Burns. It has made episodes that respond to these analyses, sometimes directly, sometimes obliquely. It has created moments that seem designed to reward the most attentive viewers, to give them something that casual viewers would miss. This creates a strange intimacy between the show and its devoted audience. The Simpsons has been talking to us about itself for 30-plus years, and we have been talking about it back, and at some point those conversations began to influence each other in ways that are genuinely difficult to trace. The show shaped what fans expected. The fans shaped what the show produced. The theories became part of the show's meaning, even when the show didn't endorse them, maybe especially when it didn't endorse them. Springfield is real, in this sense, not in spite of being fictional, but because of it. It has been looked at long enough, and by enough people, and with enough care, that it has accumulated a kind of reality that most fictional places never achieve. You can have genuine arguments about what really happened in Springfield. You can make evidence-based claims about the town's geography, its history, its characters' inner lives. You can be right or wrong about them. That's not possible for a place that hasn't been fully imagined. Springfield has been imagined thoroughly enough by the writers and by 35 years of audience attention that it has its own logic now, its own truth. That's unusual. That might be unique. And it's worth naming as a fact about what this show has become and why the theories feel like more than just speculation. Expansion. The final theory. The audience as Springfield. There is one more theory, the last one, the one that turns the lens around. We have spent this entire video examining Springfield from the outside, looking at the radiation, the coma, the power structures, the mythology, the patterns. We have placed ourselves in the position of analysts, seeing things that the characters cannot see, understanding things that the people of the town are too damaged or too afraid to understand. But the final theory is this: we are Springfield. Not metaphorically, not as a cute conclusion, structurally, functionally. Think about what we've established about Springfield. It's a place where people don't accumulate learning, where the same disasters keep happening and the population keeps absorbing them and moving on, where a single powerful entity provides the conditions of everyone's lives and they remain dependent on that entity even while it harms them, where collective denial is the primary social technology for managing uncomfortable truths, where the most important things keep happening below the threshold of official acknowledgement. Now think about what we know about the relationship between audiences and the media they consume. We watch The Simpsons. We have watched it for decades. We know, intellectually, that the show has declined from its peak, and we keep watching. We know, in some part of ourselves, that the show's satire of consumerism and corporate power is embedded in a product that is itself a commercial entity, distributed by a corporation, generating revenue for shareholders. We know the gaps between the show's critique of Springfield's economy and the economic reality of the show's existence. And we continue. We absorb the episodes, we reset, we come back. The collective amnesia that allows Springfield to function is not a dysfunction local to the town. It's the general condition of audiences in relation to long-running media. We forget what a show was. We hold on to the feeling of what it meant to us when it was at its best. We sustain the relationship because the relationship has become part of how we understand ourselves, part of the furniture of our inner lives. Springfield can't leave the loop because the loop is what Springfield is. And we can't leave the show because the show has been part of who we are for so long that leaving it would require dismantling something in ourselves we're not ready to examine. The radiation is real. The coma might be real. Burns is absolutely real, in the sense that matters as a portrait of concentrated power that manages the conditions of other people's lives. But the most real thing in all of it is the couch. The Yellow family sitting down together. Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie, arranged in their familiar order, facing the television that faces them back, in the house on Evergreen Terrace in the town that doesn't exist on any map. We built that couch. We've been sitting on it in our minds for 35 years. We built the town around it, the theories around the town, the meaning around the theories. Springfield is where we go when we need something to stay the same. When the world is too much and the week was too long and everything is moving too fast and we need 5 people on a couch who will be exactly where we left them, in exactly the same arrangement, in exactly the same town, when we come back, the loop isn't a flaw. It's the feature. It's the thing we built it for. And that's why we stay. End of expanded script. Expansion. The secondary characters and what they carry. Springfield is not just the Simpson family. It is a town, and towns are built from the accumulation of ordinary lives that never quite make it to the center of the story. The secondary characters of The Simpsons, the ones who orbit the family without being part of it, are some of the most fully realized supporting players in television history, and the theories that attach to them are worth exploring in their own right. Apu Nahasapi Mapetilon. Apu runs the Quickie Mart. He has been open for business 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for the entirety of the show's run. He has been married, had octuplets, experienced the weight of cultural displacement, navigated the specific strange position of being an immigrant in a town that is both entirely dependent on his labor and entirely ignorant of who he is. The theory about Apu is both simpler and sadder than the supernatural theories attached to other characters. Apu is the show's clearest portrait of invisible labor, The person who is always there, always open, always smiling, providing the services that Springfield runs on, and who is simultaneously the target of the town's casual xenophobia and indifference. The quick E-Mart never closes. Apu is always there. In the show's logic, he seems almost to live at the counter, a perpetual presence who exists to serve the town's impulse purchases and late-night needs. And what the show has slowly accumulated across decades of Apu appearances is a portrait of a man who came to Springfield with a different life in mind and gradually became the role the town needed him to play. That's not a unique story. It's one of the oldest stories in American life. The immigrant who arrives with full personhood and is gradually reduced to function. Apu has more depth than that reduction. The show has given him a family, a complex inner life, episodes that let him be a fully realized person rather than just a service provider. But the structural position remains. The quick E-Mart is always open. Apu is always there. The radiation theory could apply here too. Apu has been in Springfield long enough to be affected by whatever is in the water. But there's a version of his story that doesn't need that explanation, where the compression of his life, the reduction of his possibilities, is simply the normal operation of the economy he arrived in. He didn't need radiation for his options to narrow. He needed Springfield. Krusty the Clown, Krusty Krustovsky Herschel, to people who know him in the context that matter, is the show's sustained portrait of entertainment as both gift and prison. He has been a children's television entertainer for his entire adult life. He performs a character, the clown, the jester, the man who exists only to generate laughter, and the performance has, over decades, become indistinguishable from the person. Krusty cannot step outside the clown. He has tried. The show has given him episodes where the armor comes off, where we see the Jewish comedian's son who wanted his father's approval and became a cultural institution and still hasn't gotten it. These episodes are among the show's most emotionally resonant. But the fan theory about Krusty is specific. It argues that Krusty's self-destruction, his gambling, his financial recklessness, his personal chaos, is not incidental to the character. It is the character. Krusty has found the only way he knows to feel real. By generating crises that require his attention, by courting disaster, by living at the extreme edge of consequence where the numbness of performance can't quite reach. The children watching his show see the clown. The adults in his orbit see the chaos. Neither sees Herschel, the person underneath, who has been performing since childhood and has slowly lost track of whether the performance is a choice or a condition. Krusty is what happens when you give a person a role early enough and thoroughly enough that the role becomes the only stable self they have. Springfield needed a children's entertainer. Herschel had the skills and the desperate need for approval. The town got what it needed. The person inside paid for it. Sideshow Bob. Robert Terwilliger's Sideshow Bob is, in theory, the most out-of-place character in Springfield. He is cultured, educated, artistically sophisticated, possessed of genuine intellectual gifts that Springfield has no use for and no capacity to appreciate. He plays the tuba. He has memorized Gilbert and Sullivan. He has opinions about architecture. He is by every measure of what the town values completely wrong for Springfield. And yet he can't leave. The show frames his inability to leave as obsession. He keeps coming back for Bart, keeps planning revenge, keeps getting pulled back into the cycle of humiliation and attempted murder and arrest that defines his relationship with the Simpson family. But the theory underneath the comedy is that Sideshow Bob stays in Springfield because Bart is the only person who has ever made him feel powerful enough to be dangerous. Outside of Springfield, Bob has options. He has education, talent, potential career paths that don't involve murdering a 10-year-old boy. He has, in various episodes, achieved distance from Springfield and seemed on the verge of a different life. And then he returns. Always. The coma theory would say Bob is one of Homer's dream figures, a character his unconscious generated to give Bart a worthy antagonist. The radiation theory would say Bob has been in Springfield long enough that whatever the contamination does to decision-making has compromised his capacity to build the exit. But the most human theory is simpler. Bob is a person who defined himself through his conflict with Bart, and without that conflict, he doesn't know who he is. The obsession isn't a character flaw. It's the only coherent narrative he has left. Springfield and the boy it contains is the only thing that makes him specific, and so he comes back. Every time, in some variation, because the alternative, a life in which he is simply a talented man with no particular enemy, no particular wound, is a life in which he is nobody in particular. Springfield is Sideshow Bob's mirror, the same way it's a mirror for everyone else. It reflects back the version of you that you became by being there. Expansion. The show's music and what it tells us. Danny Elfman's Simpsons theme is one of the most recognized pieces of music in television history. In its first notes, the show's entire tonal world is established playful, slightly frantic, full of unexpected turns, with a warmth underneath the quirkiness that anchors everything. But the show's relationship with music extends far beyond its theme. Music in The Simpsons is not background, it is commentary. Lisa's saxophone is the most obvious example. She plays jazz, a form that the show treats with genuine understanding and respect, in a way that is unusual for mainstream television. Jazz is the music of improvisation, of taking the constraints you're given and finding freedom within them, of saying something new within a structure that you've inherited. That's Lisa's life. That's Lisa's project. The saxophone is not an accessory. It is the clearest expression of what she's trying to do in Springfield. Homer's relationship with music is different. Homer sings, badly, enthusiastically, in ways that are played for comedy but that carry a specific emotional texture. Homer sings when he is happy. He sings in the car, in the shower, on the walk to the quick E-Mart. The singing is unremarkable. It's not skilled, it's not beautiful, but it is unguarded. It is Homer in a moment of genuine unself-consciousness, not trying to be anything, just being. In the radiation theory, Homer's unguarded happiness is slightly heartbreaking, the ease with which a cognitively impaired man accesses joy, because the impairment has also removed the anxiety that would otherwise stand between him and it. In the coma theory, Homer's singing is the dreaming mind's expression of what it wanted most, a life simple enough to sing about. The show has also, throughout its run, featured genuine musical moments that step outside the comedic register entirely. Bleeding Gums Murphy's Jazz, the Barbershop Quartet, the various classical and operatic references that populate episodes set around Springfield's cultural institutions, and, memorably, the folk songs and working-class music that occasionally appear in episodes dealing with labor, community, and the ordinary life of Springfield's non-famous residents. The music of The Simpsons is the emotional truth of Springfield, running underneath the jokes. When the words can't carry the feeling, when the humor would undermine what the moment actually needs, the music takes over. It has been doing this since the show's earliest episodes, and 35 years of watching has made the cues unconscious. The opening theme arrives and something relaxes. That's not nostalgia exactly. It's more specific than that. It's the recognition of a world, a particular combination of sounds and images that, over decades of exposure, has become a kind of home. The theme plays and Springfield materializes. The characters take their places. The couch receives the family, and whatever has happened in the world outside, or whatever the episode is going to put them through, the music says, "This is familiar. This is yours. You have been here before. You know this place. Come in." Expansion. The show's writers and the real genius of Springfield, a significant part of what makes Springfield feel like a real place. What gives the theories their texture and their weight is the extraordinary quality of the writing that built it. The Simpsons, at its peak, had one of the most talented writing staffs in the history of television. This is not a casual claim. The people who worked on the show in its classic era included individuals who would go on to become major forces in American comedy across every medium: film, television, literature, podcasting. They brought unusually broad backgrounds to the work. Several had doctorates or near-doctorate level training in mathematics, linguistics, history, and the sciences. One writer had a background in theoretical physics. Several had Harvard degrees. The show's ability to make jokes that worked simultaneously on multiple levels. Jokes that were funny on the surface and also structurally sophisticated, or scientifically accurate, or historically resonant came from this unusual concentration of intellectual range. What this means for the theories is that many of the patterns fans have identified are genuinely there. The radiation theory isn't something an obsessive fan invented whole cloth and projected onto an indifferent show. The show genuinely embedded details about radiation, about the power plant's safety record, about the three-eyed fish and what it implies, in ways that reward careful attention. The Mona Simpson conspiracy isn't just a dramatic backstory. It was constructed with genuine attention to how the threads connect, how Burns's biological weapons lab, Mona's activism, Homer's subsequent employment, and the deal between Abe and Burns all fit together into a coherent picture of generational harm. This doesn't mean the writers were putting this all together with the conscious intention of supporting a unified radiation theory or a coma theory. It means they were smart, careful craftspeople who built a world consistently enough and in enough detail that patterns emerged, patterns that are real, that the material supports, that reward the kind of sustained attention the fan community has given the show. The best version of The Simpsons is the version where the comedy and the depth are genuinely the same thing, where the joke about the three-eyed fish is funny because it's absurd, and where the detail about the three-eyed fish is also real because it points to something true about communities that absorb industrial pollution and call it normal. Where Homer's stupidity is a source of comedy and is also, in a certain reading, a portrait of what happens to a person shaped by the things that shaped Homer. That's the show at its best. And enough of the show's run was spent at that level that the best version is the version most people carry with them. The later seasons have been uneven. Some have been weak. The show has run long enough that it has produced as much material as it has produced, for better and worse. But the good years were very good. And the world they built was real enough to sustain 35 years of attention and theorizing and conversation. That's the real genius of Springfield. Not any individual episode or character or joke, the cumulative reality. The accumulated weight of a place that has been imagined, episode by episode and year by year, until it has become somewhere that feels as true as anywhere you've actually been. Expansion. The closing loop, all theories as one theory. We have spent a long time in Springfield. We've moved through it from multiple angles. The biological, the psychological, the conspiratorial, the structural, the emotional. We've followed individual characters into their backstories and their futures. We've examined the town's geography, its economy, its relationship with time, and every path leads to the same place. Not to a single answer, the theories don't collapse into one. The radiation theory and the coma theory and the collective denial theory and the Burns immortality theory are all genuinely different explanations for different aspects of the same phenomenon. They don't require each other, they stand alone. But they all arrive at the same destination. Something is fundamentally off about Springfield, and the offness is not random. It has structure. It has causes. It runs deeper than the surface comedy, deeper than the episodic format, deeper than the animation conventions. Springfield is a place that should not be the way it is. And it is the way it is because of accumulated causes, industrial, conspiratorial, psychological, biological, that have been building since long before the show's first episode, and that show no sign of resolving. The real mystery of The Simpsons isn't any single theory. It's the persistence. The show keeps going. Springfield keeps existing. Homer keeps going to work. The fish in the river have three eyes, and the cooling towers have cracks, and Burns is alive somehow, and Maggie is watching, and nobody ages and nobody learns, and the loop keeps running. Why? The theories have answers. The radiation explains the cognitive impairment that prevents the population from mounting a sustained challenge to the conditions of their lives. The coma explains the dreaming mind's refusal to let the story end, because ending the story means confronting what lies beyond it. The collective denial explains the town's active, deliberate choice to sustain the comfortable lie over the uncomfortable truth. Burns's immortality explains why the source of the problem cannot be removed. The man is too expensive to die, and too embedded in the town's infrastructure to simply be challenged out of existence. All of these are true at once. They don't conflict. They are different levels of the same explanation, like different altitudes from which you can view the same landscape. The show keeps going because the problem it depicts has no solution within its own logic. Springfield cannot fix itself from the inside. The people who would fix it are too impaired to do so. The person who would need to change is too powerful to be made to change. The structures that would need to be dismantled provide the material conditions that the population depends on, so the loop runs, and the show runs with it, and we watch. Because we recognize it. Because something in us knows that the loop the show depicts is not unique to Springfield. Because the comfortable lies and the convenient amnesia and the dependency on structures that harm us and the difficulty of imagining a different arrangement, all of that is familiar in a way that doesn't require nuclear radiation to explain. Springfield is us. Springfield has always been us. The yellow skin and the four fingers and the three-eyed fish are just the show's way of making visible what is usually invisible. The cartoon exaggerates until the truth is clear enough to see. And what it shows us, when we look at it long enough and carefully enough, is a picture of a community caught in a loop it cannot break, sustained by forces it cannot fully see, managed by a power it cannot challenge, made comfortable enough by the ordinary pleasures of ordinary life to keep going without asking the questions whose answers would be too much to bear. That's not a story about Springfield. That's a story about everywhere. And The Simpsons has been telling it, episode by episode, for over 30 years, dressed up in bright colors and slapstick, and the world's most famous family, because the truth is easier to hear when it's wearing yellow and making you laugh. Take that as you will. Sleep well. Springfield will be here when you wake up. Script complete. Estimated total, 40,000 plus words. Expansion. The Simpsons and American Class. What Homer's job actually means. There is an economic theory running underneath The Simpsons that rarely gets named directly, but that shapes almost everything about the show's emotional register. Homer Simpson is a member of the American working class, not the romanticized working class of country music or political campaign rhetoric, the real working class, the one that doesn't get many romantic depictions. He works a skilled trade job that requires certification and training and specific technical competence, and he performs it badly because the cognitive impairment we've discussed makes sustained competence difficult. He earns enough to own a house and support a family of 5 without significant hardship, which places him in a specific and, in the decades since the show began, increasingly historically unusual economic position. The show was created in 1989. The economic conditions it depicts a working-class father who supports a family of 5 on a single income, in a house he owns, in a stable, if unglamorous career, were already becoming unusual in 1989, and have only become more unusual since. By some readings, Homer Simpson's economic situation is the show's most powerful piece of satire, and the least remarked upon. A portrait of a standard of living that has been quietly disappearing for the entire duration of the show's run. Homer has a union. The show depicts labor organizing periodically, and Homer's relationship with the union is the relationship of someone who takes for granted the protections that were built by people who fought for them, who benefits from the structure without understanding or caring about its history. This is played for comedy. Homer is not a class-conscious character in the political sense. But his conditions of life are shaped by class, by the economic relationships between workers and capital, between Burns and his employees, between Springfield's largest employer and the town it essentially owns. And the theory is that the show has been depicting the slow erosion of Homer's kind of stability for 35 years, right in plain sight, while playing it as comedy. Each season, the pressures on the Simpson household are a little more intense. The financial crises are a little more frequent. The security of Homer's position at the plant becomes a little more contingent. The joke about Homer being impossible to fire is a joke, but it's also a portrait of what a working-class person's job security actually depends on: not performance, not loyalty, not merit, but contingent arrangements that exist for reasons that have nothing to do with the worker's interests. Homer gets to keep his job because Grandpa made a deal, not because Homer is good at his job, not because the plant needs him specifically. Because of an arrangement between power brokers that Homer was never party to and never knew about. The radiation theory explains Homer's impairment. The Mona theory explains Homer's emotional architecture. The class theory explains why Homer stays in the job anyway, why the plant is not a choice but a condition, why the question of why doesn't Homer just quit doesn't have an easy answer, because quitting assumes options that Homer's economic reality doesn't provide. Springfield is not just a contamination zone, it's an economy. And the people inside it are not just damaged by radiation, they are also positioned by economic relationships that they didn't choose and can't easily exit. That's the hardest version of the Springfield story to hold on to. Not because it's the darkest, the radiation theory goes darker, but because it's the most mundane. It doesn't require nuclear contamination or a man in a coma. It only requires recognizing that the conditions of life for most people in most places are shaped by forces that operate well above their level, and that the person living within those conditions can be completely aware of the individual facts of their life, can love their family, enjoy their beer, be funny and generous and human, while being entirely unable to see the structural picture. Homer is not a victim. He's not a hero. He's a person caught in a set of conditions he didn't create and can't change. And the show has been honest about that for 35 years, in between all the jokes about donuts and nuclear meltdowns. That's worth naming. Expansion, the Treehouse section deeper. Let's go back to the Treehouse of Horror episodes, because there's more there than we covered the first time. The horror anthology format gives the show permission to say things it can't say in the main continuity. We've established this. But the specific things it says, across 30-plus years of Halloween specials, tell us something specific about what the show's writers were afraid of when they sat down at their desks in whatever writer's room they occupied that year. In the early Treehouse specials, the fears are external. Aliens invade Springfield. A haunted house attacks the family. A monster appears in the night. These are the fears of classic horror, the threat that comes from outside, the intrusion of the supernatural into the domestic world. They are safe fears, in a sense. The alien is clearly alien. The monster is clearly a monster. The threat can be named and, eventually, either defeated or accepted. As the show aged, the Treehouse specials changed. The fears became less external and more structural. The monsters became systems rather than creatures. The horror became the ordinary world, viewed from a slightly different angle. Treehouse of Horror V is where this shift crystallizes. The segment that has most haunted viewers over the decades is Time and Punishment, in which Homer attempts to go back and correct mistakes and keeps making everything worse until he accepts a version of the world that is almost right, almost like home, and decides to live there rather than keep trying to make it perfect. The horror isn't supernatural. It's the horror of sunk costs, of making choices that cannot be fully undone, of settling for close enough because the perfect keeps generating new disasters. That's not a ghost story. That's a story about every adult life. The segment Nightmare Cafeteria, from the same episode, features teachers eating students. Read at face value, it's a parody of institutional horror movies. Read as metaphor, it's a fairly specific portrait of what underfunded educational systems do to the children inside them, how resource scarcity turns institutions intended to serve children into systems that consume them. The teachers don't eat the students because they're evil. They eat the students because there's nothing else to eat. The budget has been cut, the choices have been narrowed, and the children are what's available. That's dark. It's also, as educational funding battles have continued through the decades, uncomfortably resonant. Later Treehouse specials explore the fears of an older show, the fear of obsolescence, the fear of being replaced by newer models, the fear of a world that has changed while you stayed the same. There are episodes about AI and automation, about surveillance and data, about the future arriving and not looking the way it was supposed to look. These fears are not random either. They are the specific fears of writers who have been in the same job, producing the same show, for longer than most careers. Last people who watch the entertainment landscape change around them and wonder, not always in the Treehouse register, but sometimes, whether the world they built still fits. The Treehouse of Horror is the show's nightmare. Not the characters' nightmares. Homer's nightmares would look different. The show's nightmare. The collective anxiety of the people making it, given a format that lets it surface. When you watch those specials with that in mind, they become a different kind of document, not just a horror anthology. An annual report from the inside of a creative enterprise, rendered in monsters and comedy, on what it actually felt like to be making The Simpsons in any given year. Expansion. Lisa's Future. The episode that almost answered everything. In Season 6, the show aired an episode called Lisa's Wedding, which is widely considered one of the greatest episodes in the show's history and certainly one of its most emotionally complex. In it, Lisa is in college at a prestigious university, having escaped Springfield. She meets a fortune teller who shows her a vision of the future, a future in which she is 23 years old, engaged to a cultured and sophisticated Englishman named Hugh, on the verge of the life that all of her gifts seem to point toward. The episode is set in 2010, and the future it depicts has the specific texture of a television show from 1995 imagining the future. The details are off in ways that are sometimes charming and sometimes pointed. But the emotional core is not about the technology. It's about whether Lisa gets to escape, and she doesn't. Not entirely. She reaches the moment of departure, the wedding, the future, the life, and she can't let go of her family. She can't let go of Homer. The episode ends with Lisa calling off the engagement, or, more precisely, with Hugh refusing to return to Springfield with her, and Lisa choosing Springfield, and then with a beautiful, heartbreaking conversation between young adult Lisa and Homer in the present of the episode's past. She asks her father to remember the day. He says he will. We know, because we've watched the show, that he won't, that by the next episode, neither of them will carry this moment forward, that the floating timeline will reassert itself, and Lisa will be 8 again, and Homer will be the same Homer. But in the episode, in that moment, something genuinely true passes between them. A father and a daughter meeting each other clearly, for a moment, across the gulf that the show's structure usually maintains between them. The fan theory about Lisa's wedding is that it is the show's only direct answer to the question it has always been circling. What does Springfield cost? And the answer is this. Exactly this. It costs Lisa this life. The English fiancé, the prestigious future, the escape from everything that made childhood hard. She could have had all of it. She had the intelligence, the grades, the ambition, the will, but the family pulled her back, not with malice, not with any specific demand, just by being the family, by being Homer, bumbling and loving and impossible to fully leave, even when leaving would be the rational choice. Springfield costs you the life you could have had if you'd left it, and then it gives you back, in exchange, the life you have here, the one with the people you can't quite quit. The show never staged a follow-up to this episode, never brought Lisa back to that possible future to see what she ultimately chose, how the calculation ultimately landed. It left the question open, the way the show leaves most of its questions open. But the episode is there, and it says something that the comedy can't quite say directly, that the family is both the wound and the cure. That Springfield takes something and gives something, and the accounting never quite comes out even. That love is the reason people stay in places that cost them something real. That's not a theory. That's what the show has been about all along. Expansion. The show's silences. There is one more thing worth sitting with before we let Springfield go for tonight. Not a theory, an observation. The Simpsons is a loud show. It is full of jokes and sight gags and verbal pyrotechnics and physical comedy and the constant overlapping noise of a family that never stops talking. The loudness is part of the pleasure. The show's density, the number of jokes per minute, the layers of reference, the rapid-fire pace of the classic episodes is part of what makes it feel alive. But the show also has silences, moments where it stops. The most famous is the ending of Mother Simpson. Homer sitting on the hood of his car, alone, looking up at the stars, as the camera slowly pulls back. No dialogue, no joke. Just a man and the sky, and the weight of 30 years of not knowing his mother was alive. The episode earns this silence through everything that came before it, and then it holds it, without rescue, without a comedic out, for long enough that you feel it. There are others. The end of Lisa's Substitute, where Mr. Bergstrom leaves a note for Lisa that says only her name, and she reads it, and the show lets her feel that someone saw her. The climax of And Maggie Makes Three, the episode told in flashback about how Homer came to put Maggie's baby photo over the "Don't forget, you're here forever" sign in his workstation, rearranging the letters until they read, "Do it for her." No joke, just the image, just what it means. The silences are where the show tells you what it actually believes, what it holds underneath all the noise. The comedy is real, the show is genuinely, continuously funny, which is not a small thing, but the silences are the places where the show stops performing and simply feels. Fan theories tend to be generated by the loud parts of the show, by the contradictions and the impossibilities and the buried details that reward careful attention. But the theories point back, eventually, to the silences, to the quiet center of the show, to what it believes about family and love and the passage of time and the things that stay with us and the things we lose. Homer loves his family. This is not a theory. It is the most fundamental fact of the show. Everything else, the radiation, the coma, the conspiracies, the mysteries exists in relation to this fact, either as an explanation for it or a threat to it or a consequence of it. Homer loves his family the way that people love things they're afraid of losing. Desperately, imperfectly, with more feeling than skill, with better intentions than outcomes. He loves them in the middle of the disasters he causes. He loves them through the impairment that prevents him from being fully present. He loves them in his coma dream, if the coma theory is true, with the particular intensity of love that cannot express itself in any other way. And the show loves him for it, not in a sentimental way, not in a way that excuses his failures or softens their consequences, but in the way that good stories love their protagonists by taking them seriously, by following them honestly into the worst of themselves, by staying with them long enough to show both the damage and the light that persists alongside it. That's the show. After all the theories and all the mysteries and all the buried details after the glowing fish and the crayon and the conspiracy and the question of who really pulled the trigger, a man who loves his family, a town that holds him in place, and 35 years of Sunday nights that turned it into something that belongs, now, to everyone who watched. That's Springfield. Sleep well. Final end of script. Expansion. The mythology of the couch gag. Before we close the book on Springfield, there is one element of The Simpsons that deserves its own sustained attention. It is probably the most watched piece of animation in television history, and yet it is also, paradoxically, the piece of the show most people discuss, least not because it's unimportant, but because it has been so thoroughly absorbed into the furniture of the show that we stop seeing it as a creative choice. The couch gag. Every episode of The Simpsons opens the same way. The theme plays. The family runs through Springfield in their various arrangements, and then they arrive at the couch, and something happens. Sometimes it's a brief sight gag, the couch breaks, the family arrives in the wrong order, a stranger is already sitting there. Sometimes it's an elaborate production, a parody of another show's opening, a surrealist animation piece, a miniature film that has nothing to do with the episode that follows. Sometimes it's simple and fast. Sometimes it runs for several minutes. The couch gag is theoretically the most flexible element of the opening sequence, the place where the show can do almost anything. And across more than 700 episodes, the couch gag has been used to do almost everything: comedy, satire, art, tribute, provocation, meditation. The fan theory about the couch gag is both simple and strange. The couch gag is the show's unconscious. Think about what it actually is. The family runs toward the couch, toward the domestic center, the gathering place, the physical symbol of the household, and something goes wrong, or right, or sideways. The arrival at the couch is prevented, delayed, complicated, or transformed. And then the episode begins. In the context of the coma theory, this has a specific resonance. If the show is Homer's dream, then the opening sequence is the recurring structure of the dream, the attempt to get back to the couch, to the family, to the moment of everyone together. And the couch gag is the variation in each attempt. Sometimes it works simply. Sometimes it's complicated. Sometimes the family members get lost along the way. Sometimes the couch itself isn't what it appeared to be, but the attempt always happens. Every episode, the family tries to get to the couch. Every episode, Homer's dreaming mind runs the same opening gambit, the same route home, the same gathering, the same attempt at the family in its right arrangement. In the waking world, this would be obsession. In the world of the coma theory, it's simply what the dreaming mind does when it knows what it wants most. It runs toward it. It runs toward it every single time. The couch gag is Homer coming home. Over and over, in hundreds of variations, getting it right and getting it wrong and getting it sideways, and sometimes getting it in a way that's entirely surreal, but always running toward the couch. Always trying to arrive. That's not a decoration on the show. That's the show's deepest image, repeated more times than any other image in the series. The family on the couch, Homer made it back. Again. Expansion. The show's relationship with religion. The Simpsons has been engaging with American religion since its earliest episodes, and it has done so in a way that is more sophisticated than it usually gets credit for. The show is not anti-religious. It is not a show that dismisses faith or treats it with contempt. Homer has spoken to God directly in multiple episodes, and the God of The Simpsons is not a malevolent force or a delusion. He is real within the show's universe, and he is in the specific way the show characterizes him, a being who is fond of Homer in the way that someone might be fond of a genuinely lovable but deeply confused puppy. God talks to Homer. God does not talk to Ned Flanders. This is the most pointed religious statement the show makes, and it makes it over and over, across decades of material. The drunk, the blunderer, the man with the crayon in his brain who falls asleep in church and eats during the sermon, he gets divine communication. The devout, the prayerful, the man who has organized his entire life around his faith, he gets silence. The fan theory about this asks, what does it mean within the show's own theology? One reading is that the show is critiquing the Ned Flanderses of the world, suggesting that performative, rule-bound religion misses the point and that the genuine spiritual contact is available only to those who approach God with something more like raw, unfiltered honesty. Homer doesn't perform his relationship with God. He stumbles into it. He is honest clumsily, inadvertently in ways that Ned's careful observance doesn't allow for. And God, in the show's logic, prefers the stumbling honesty to the careful performance. Another reading is darker. The show's God is not just, not in the sense we'd want justice to mean. He gives his attention to the people he finds entertaining, and he finds Homer entertaining in ways that Ned, being too careful and too correct, never quite manages to be. This is not a flattering portrait of the divine. It is a portrait of power that is arbitrary, that distributes its gifts according to its own preferences, rather than any principle that the recipients can understand or appeal to. In this reading, The Simpsons' God is a version of Burns. Both operate above the level at which accountability applies. Both make choices that are opaque to the people affected by them. Both have the power to help and sometimes do, and the power to ignore and frequently do that too. The parallel between Burns and the divine presence in Springfield is not something the show has ever made explicit, but it's there in the structure of the world. The show depicts a world where the most powerful beings operate by rules that ordinary people can't access, and where the people most desperately seeking connection with those powers are often the last to receive it. Ned prays every night. Burns maintains his weekly treatment schedule. Both of them are managing their relationship with forces they depend on but cannot fully understand. Both of them are waiting for something that may or may not come. Expansion. Grandpa Simpson and the Weight of the Past. Abraham Simpson Grandpa is one of the most melancholy characters in the show's ensemble, and his melancholy is rarely discussed at length because it is usually translated into comedy. Grandpa tells stories. He tells them constantly long, rambling, digressive stories about the past that usually turn out to be beside the point, or actively wrong, or simply the confused recollections of a man who is not entirely sure what year he is in. The stories are funny. They are also, if you sit with them, the expression of something genuinely painful. A man who used to matter, who used to be someone with stories worth telling, who has been deposited in a retirement home and largely forgotten by the family he raised. Homer visits Grandpa. The show is honest about this. Homer does not visit often. He finds the retirement home depressing and his father's presence demanding. He loves his father in the way that people love complicated parents, with genuine warmth mixed with genuine resentment, the two feelings so old and so deep that they are almost impossible to separate. Grandpa's stories are his attempt to remain relevant, to justify his presence, to demonstrate that he has lived something worth listening to, even if the current occupants of the room find him hard to follow. And the fan theory about Grandpa is this: he is the most truthful narrator in Springfield, and nobody believes him. When Grandpa makes claims about the past, about things he saw, things he did, things he knows about the history of the town and the family, the other characters tend to dismiss them as senile rambling. And the show often plays it this way, setting up his stories as punchlines. But when you go back and track the details, Grandpa's stories are more often accurate than inaccurate. He knows things. He was there for things. His history is real. The deal he made with Burns, the things he knew about Mona, the context he has for Homer's life that Homer himself has never been given. Grandpa is carrying the family's true history in a mind that the rest of the family has written off as unreliable. And the tragedy is that by the time anyone might want to know what he knows, The window for reliable transmission is closing. Springfield's amnesia is generational. The town forgets. But Grandpa, in his confused and digressive way, keeps trying to remember, keeps dragging the past into the room, insisting that it matters, that the history has weight, that the things that happened before Homer was born are part of why Homer is the way he is. He's right. Nobody listens. The show keeps running. Expansion. The question of the happy ending. If you watch enough Simpsons episodes enough to see the patterns, you start to notice something about how they end. They end happily, nearly always. Not with resolution exactly, not with the problems fully solved, but with the family in a good place. Homer and Marge reconciled. Bart and Lisa back to their antagonistic but affectionate baseline. The crisis of the week acknowledged and then absorbed. The family on the couch, or at the dinner table, or in some arrangement that reads as okay for now. This is episodic television convention. It is also, in the context of everything we've been discussing, a meaningful choice. The radiation theory suggests that Springfield's chronic contamination prevents the formation of durable memories. The collective denial theory suggests that the town's social contract requires the regular erasure of uncomfortable truths. The coma theory suggests that Homer's dreaming mind cannot sustain a narrative in which the family is broken. All three of these explanations predict the same structural outcome. The episodes end with the family intact. The reset happens. The next week begins. But the happy endings are also doing something else, something that is less theoretical and more emotional. They are the show's promise. It's guaranteed to the viewer. You can come back next week. The family will be okay. Whatever happened this week, whatever crisis, whatever rupture, whatever terrible thing Homer did or Bart caused or Lisa couldn't prevent, the family will be okay when you return. The damage won't have accumulated. The wound will have healed. Homer and Marge will still love each other. This promise is the reason people watch for 35 years. Not the jokes, not the satire, not the theories, the promise. The assurance that the family on the couch will be there, that the house on Evergreen Terrace will still be standing, that the specific combination of these 5 people, arranged in their familiar configuration, will persist. In a world that doesn't make that promise, where everything else keeps changing, where jobs end and relationships break down, and the things you love most are not guaranteed, The Simpsons makes the promise. Every week. For over 3 decades. It keeps the family together. It runs the loop. It delivers the happy ending. And that is, finally, why we built Springfield. Why we keep going back. Why the ratings have outlasted empires and the show has outlasted every prediction about when it would end. Not because it's perfect, not because the later seasons match the earlier ones, not because every theory checks out or every mystery resolves, but because it keeps the promise. The family is okay. Come back next Sunday. They'll still be there. Completed script total approximate word count, 40,500 plus. Expansion. The Simpsons and the American Dream. The final reading. Everything in The Simpsons is, at some level, about the American dream. Not as an abstract concept, not as a political slogan, but as a specific promise that was made to a specific generation of people in a specific set of circumstances, and the way that promise has performed, or failed to perform, over the decades the show has been running. Homer Simpson's life is the American dream. This is not irony. He owns a house. He has a stable job. He has a marriage that works, imperfectly but genuinely. He has 3 children who are, in their various ways, thriving. He has a dog and a car and a television and a best friend and a local bar where they know his name. He has, by the metrics that the American dream has traditionally used to measure itself, made it. And yet there is something melancholy running underneath all of it. Something that the show has never quite named but has always communicated a sense that the version of the American dream Homer inhabits is smaller than the one that was promised. That the house is a little run down. That the job is a little more precarious than it appears. That the dream is being maintained through effort and luck and the deal Grandpa made with the devil, rather than through the automatic operation of a system designed to deliver it. Homer doesn't know this. The radiation theory says he can't know it. The coma theory says he's dreaming past it. But the show knows it. The show has always known it. When The Simpsons began, in 1989, it was possible to read Homer's life as a specific portrait of where a certain kind of American family was. At that specific historical moment, the post-war prosperity beginning to fray, the single-income household becoming a rarer and more precarious arrangement, the nuclear family as a structure under sustained pressure from economic and cultural forces. It wasn't designed to withstand. As the show has continued, the portrait has become more pointed. The specific details of Homer's life that were realistic in 1989 have become increasingly counterfactual as the decades have passed, not because the show changed them, but because the world around them changed. Homer's economic situation is now a historical artifact, a depiction of something that no longer exists in the form it once did, maintained by the floating timeline precisely as a kind of monument to what was. Springfield is not just a fictional town. It is a preserved version of a specific American moment, the moment before everything accelerated, before the middle class began its long compression, before the single-income household with a house and a car and a nuclear family became something that required serious financial luck rather than just average work. The show preserves that moment not because the writers are naive about economics, but because the audience needs it preserved. Because letting it go, letting Homer's life become the genuinely precarious thing that comparable lives have become in the real world, would mean admitting something about America that the show, and possibly its audience, is not ready to admit. The loop runs. The timeline floats. Homer keeps his job. The house stays standing. The family stays intact. And somewhere in that preservation is a kind of grief, quiet, unacknowledged, dissolved into comedy so thoroughly that it's easy to miss for the version of America that Springfield represents. The one that was supposed to be available to everyone. The one where ordinary work produced an ordinary life with room for joy and safety and the pleasure of a beer at the end of a long day. Springfield is a monument to that promise. A loving, satirical, sometimes scathing, ultimately tender monument. And every week that it runs, it keeps the monument lit. Expansion. A note to the person still listening. You made it. It's late, or early, or somewhere in between some liminal hour that belongs to people who are awake when they probably shouldn't be, watching or listening to something that started as background and became something else somewhere along the way. This is exactly the right time to have spent a few hours in Springfield. The theories we've explored tonight, the radiation, the coma, the conspiracy of Mona Simpson, the immortality of Burns, the silence of Maggie, the sadness of Ned, the question of who really shot the man who stole the sun, none of them have clean answers. They're not supposed to. The Simpsons isn't a show that resolves its own mysteries. It's a show that generates them, that has been generating them for over 30 years, because unresolved mysteries keep people coming back. But what I hope you take from this particular few hours is something a little different from the usual fan theory experience. The theories are not just puzzles. They're interpretations. They're ways of honoring the fact that this show, at its best, was genuinely trying to say something about real things, about how communities absorb damage, about what it costs to be intelligent in a world that rewards compliance, about what love looks like when it's expressed by someone who doesn't have the tools to express it cleanly, about how the systems we live inside shape us in ways we can't see from inside them. The Simpsons took those things seriously for a long time. It dressed them in yellow and put them in a town that doesn't exist and made them funny enough that we kept watching. And in doing so, it made them available to more people for longer than any more earnest approach could have managed. That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot. So wherever you are right now, whatever room, whatever city, whatever hour, thank you for spending this time in Springfield, for following the theories down their various paths, for being willing to sit with questions that don't resolve cleanly, and with a show that has outlasted every prediction about when it would stop mattering. It still matters. Not the same way it mattered in 1993 or 1997, but in the way that things matter when they've been part of your life long enough to become part of the furniture of how you understand things. Springfield is still there. Homer is still going to work. Maggie is still watching. Burns is still alive. The loop keeps running. And if you're drifting off now, let it take you. The show was always good company for falling asleep. The familiar voices, the familiar town, the familiar family who will be exactly where you left them when you come back. Good night, sleep well. Springfield will keep. Script complete. Total word count, approximately 40,500 words. Sections, intro plus 16, full sections plus 10, expansion sections plus outrow. Estimated runtime at 130 words per minute, approximately 5 hours, 10 minutes. Recommended for late night listening, 11 Labs voiceover, sleep content audiences. Expansion: the secondary marriages and what they reveal about Springfield. Springfield is full of marriages. This is not the first thing people notice about the show, but it becomes apparent over time the show has spent an unusual amount of its runtime depicting, in various configurations of comedy and honesty, the institution of marriage and what it actually asks of people. Homer and Marge are the central example, but they're surrounded by a gallery of other marital configurations that tell us something specific about what the show believes, or at least what it observes about how people pair off and what sustains them, or doesn't. Consider Ned and Maud Flanders before Maud's death. They were depicted as the ideal couple, mutually devoted, religiously aligned, raising their children in a household of genuine warmth. And then Maud died, in the specific and absurd way she died, and the show continued with Ned alone. What the show did with Ned's widowhood, his clumsy attempts at new relationships, his grief that never fully resolved, his continued presence next door to the man whose selfishness contributed to his loss, is one of the more sustained portraits of grief and failed recovery in mainstream American television. It's played for comedy. It is also, if you watch it straight, just sad. Principal Skinner and his relationship with Edna Krabappel, which became a genuine ongoing subplot in the show's later years, depicts something more ordinary and more real. Two middle-aged people finding each other in a town that hasn't offered them much, making something workable from available materials. It is not a romance novel. It is not aspirational. It is two people with enough history and enough compromise and enough genuine affection to make a go of it, which is probably closer to what most marriages actually are than the grand passion version the show depicts for Homer and Marge. Chief Wiggum and his wife are a portrait of a specific kind of marital contentment not deep or examined, not tested by the forces that strain Homer and Marge's relationship, but stable in the way that low expectation arrangements tend to be stable. They don't fight. They don't have the kind of drama that The Simpsons' marriage generates. They also don't seem to see each other clearly. The fan theory that ties all of these together is not grand. It's observational. It notices that the show has been depicting, across its entire run, a range of marital configurations that together form something like a complete picture of what the institution actually looks like in the specific American context Springfield inhabits. The ideal that doesn't survive, the tested love that keeps surviving, the comfortable arrangement, the late-in-life pragmatism, the obsessive attachment, the long-deferred connection. And underneath all of these is the same question the show asks about everything. What does it cost to maintain a relationship in a place like Springfield? In a town that keeps resetting, that can't accumulate consequences, that is running on contaminated water and institutional amnesia and the desperate hope that things will keep being okay? The marriages of Springfield are built on the same foundations as everything else there. Something strong enough to hold despite everything that should undermine it, and something fragile enough that you notice the effort it takes. Expansion: the show's geography as emotional map. We have discussed Springfield's geographic impossibility, its mountains and oceans and deserts that should not coexist, its refusal to be pinned to any specific American state. But there's a dimension of Springfield's geography that deserves its own exploration, the emotional geography of the town. The way that specific locations carry specific emotional weight, and how the show has used space to communicate things that the dialogue doesn't say directly. The power plant is north of the town, which means it casts a shadow over everything beneath it. This is not subtle symbolism. The show is doing it intentionally, placing the source of the town's contamination in the position that architecturally dominates the surrounding landscape. The school is central. Springfield Elementary sits in the middle of the town's geography, the way education is supposed to sit in the middle of a community's self-understanding, at the heart of things, accessible from everywhere, unavoidable. That the school is underfunded, badly administered, and sometimes actively harmful to the children it supposedly serves is the joke. The central position is the aspiration. The Bar Moe's Tavern is within walking distance of the Simpson house. This is a detail that matters. Homer can walk to the bar. He doesn't need to drive, doesn't need to make a deliberate journey. The drinking is never quite far enough away to be a choice that requires sustained intention. It is a short walk, taken often, in both celebration and despair, and the large middle ground between them. The retirement home sits at the periphery of town. This is where the old go not expelled, but removed from the center of things. Close enough to visit, far enough that the visiting can be deferred. The periphery is where Springfield puts the things it doesn't know what to do with. The old, the discarded, the evidence of what comes after working life. The Simpson house is on Evergreen Terrace. Evergreen as in always green, always the same, not subject to the seasonal changes that natural things undergo. The address is the promise in compressed form. This is a place that stays evergreen, that persists, that maintains its color while the world around it changes. Whether this was intentional in the naming, whether Matt Groening thought, when he wrote Evergreen Terrace, that the name carried this freight is not the point. The show has inhabited the name long enough that the name has become true. Evergreen Terrace is evergreen because the show will not let it change. The house stays the same, the family stays the same, the street stays the same, always green, always there. End of full script. Final verified word count target, 40,000 plus words. Expansion, 35 years of Sundays. The Simpsons airs on Sunday nights. This has been true for almost the entire duration of the show's run. Sunday at 8 o'clock, Fox, Springfield. Sunday is the day before Monday. It is the last day of the week, the hinge point between the rest that came before and the work that is coming. Sunday has a specific emotional texture in American life, a mixture of freedom and dread, of leisure and anticipation, of the weekend winding down and the week beginning to loom. Sunday afternoon light is different from Saturday afternoon light. Sunday evening has a weight to it that Friday evening doesn't. The Simpsons was placed in that time slot and in that context, and over 35 years it has become associated with it. For millions of people across multiple generations, Sunday evening means The Simpsons. The opening theme is Sunday evening. Homer, running from the car to the couch, is Sunday evening. The fan theory buried in this scheduling observation is simple but true. The Simpsons became the thing that made Sunday evenings manageable. The buffer between the rest of the week and the start of the next one. The familiar faces and the familiar town and the familiar music that said, "This day is still yours. The work hasn't started yet. Come to Springfield for half an hour. Come home." That association has become so deep across decades of viewing that it almost operates below conscious awareness for people who grew up with the show. Sunday evenings feel a particular way, and part of how they feel is Simpsons shaped. The theme plays in your head when the light hits a certain angle. You expect the couch. You expect the family to be okay. This is not small. This is the kind of cultural integration that happens only once or twice in a generation's relationship with a piece of media. The show became part of how Sunday feels. It became part of the rhythm of the week. And now, 35 years later, the show is still there, still on Sunday, still the same theme, still the same family on the same couch, in the same town. The week is about to start. The work is about to resume. The world is about to ask things of you again. But right now, it's Sunday evening. Homer just got home. Marge is in the kitchen. Bart is doing something he shouldn't. Lisa is playing her saxophone. Maggie is watching. The family is okay. You can go to sleep now. Springfield will keep until you need it again. It always does. Complete final word count. Expansion. The last things. There is a version of this video that ends here, at the Sunday evening image, on the note of comfort and familiarity. And that version is true. That's a real thing about The Simpsons. It is comforting. It is familiar. It has been part of many people's domestic rhythms for long enough that it has become embedded in how certain evenings feel. But the honest version keeps going a little further. Because the comfort is real and the darkness is also real. And a show this long has both running through it simultaneously, and leaving it at only one of them would be false. Here is what is also true. The Simpsons has run long enough that it has watched its own original audience grow up, have children, age, and in some cases die. The people who watched the first season in 1989 as teenagers are now in their 50s. The people who watched it as children in the 90s are now in their 30s and 40s. There are people who watch the show with parents who are no longer alive. There are people who watched it with siblings they've lost contact with. There are people for whom a specific episode is inseparable from a specific memory of a specific time in their life, a time that is now as far in the past as Bart's first detention. The show doesn't age. The audience does. And this creates a strange doubling in the experience of watching it now. The show is exactly what it was. The characters are exactly who they were. Springfield hasn't changed. But the person watching it has changed enormously. And watching the show from inside that changed perspective means watching it with a knowledge of everything that happened since all the episodes, all the years, all the personal history that accumulated while Homer and Marge stayed exactly where they were. The fan theory about this is not a theory at all. It's a feeling. There is a particular kind of sweetness and sadness in returning to something that was there before you understood what time meant, and finding it unchanged while you are not. In sitting down with a show that was part of your childhood and watching it with adult eyes, carrying adult knowledge, understanding things about it that the child you were couldn't have understood, the economic anxiety underneath Homer's situation, the structural sadness of Ned's faith going unanswered, the complexity of what Marge sustains while also still feeling, somewhere, the simple pleasure of the theme and the couch and the family, okay? The show hasn't changed. Your relationship to it has changed, and the gap between those two things is where most of the feeling lies. Springfield is a fixed point. We are not fixed points. We move around it as we age, seeing it differently from each position but always recognizing it, always finding the couch and the family and the cooling towers and the three-eyed fish exactly where we left them. That's the gift. That's also, if you're feeling it tonight, the small grief underneath the gift, the reminder that you are the thing that moves, not the show. The show stays. You keep going. And every Sunday evening it's there, if you need it, at the corner of Evergreen Terrace and whatever year it happens to be. Come back whenever. They'll be on the couch. True final end. Expansion. One last look at Homer. We have spent so much time analyzing Homer Simpson, explaining him, theorizing about him, positioning him as an effect of radiation or a dreaming brain, or a conspiracy 3 generations deep that it's worth, at the very end. Stepping back from the analysis and simply looking at him. Homer Simpson is 40 years old and has been 40 years old for 35 years. He is large and loud, and he eats donuts, and he drinks beer, and he falls asleep in places where falling asleep is inappropriate. He does not always say the right thing. He frequently says the wrong thing. He has caused disasters that a more attentive person would have prevented, and has created crises that a smarter person would have navigated. He has hurt the people he loves through carelessness and through the specific kind of damage that cognitively impaired people inflict not out of malice, but out of a diminished capacity to track the downstream consequences of their actions. He is also, without question, one of the most beloved characters in the history of American storytelling. This is worth sitting with. Not because it's surprising, of course, the protagonist of a beloved show is beloved, but because of what it says about what audiences actually respond to when you strip away the surface. We do not love Homer because he is admirable. He is not consistently admirable. We do not love Homer because he is aspirational. He represents a condition most of us would not choose for ourselves. We do not love Homer because his intelligence or his achievements or his moral record gives us something to look up to. We love Homer because he keeps trying, because every disaster produces a new attempt, because the love, however imperfectly expressed, is genuine. Because the man inside the donut-eating, safety inspector failing, couch-collapsing exterior is someone who simply, profoundly, and without much complication wants his family to be okay, and wants to be the person who makes them okay. He usually falls short. The show is honest about this. He falls short in both small ways and occasionally catastrophic ones. But he comes back. He apologizes, or he doesn't, but his next action is the apology. He keeps running toward the couch. He keeps making it home by the end of the episode. That's what we love. Not the achievement, but the orientation. Not the arrival, but the direction. Homer Simpson is pointed toward his family. Through the radiation and the crayon and the conspiracy and the 35 years of Sunday evenings and the floating timeline and the three-eyed fish and the cracked cooling towers and all of it, he is pointed toward Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything. To be pointed in the right direction and to keep going, even if you fall short. Even if you forget. Even if the town you live in is a contamination zone, and your mother had to leave, and your boss has been ruining your family for 3 generations, and the fish have 3 eyes and nobody ages, and the same disasters keep happening, and the reset keeps clicking back to 0. To keep pointing toward the people you love, and to try, again to make it home. Good night, Springfield. Good night, Homer. We'll see you Sunday.